నమస్కారం. దూరదర్శన్ వార్తలకు స్వాగతం. నేను మాధురి. ముందుగా కరోనా నియంత్రించేందుకు తీసుకోవాల్సిన చర్యలతో వార్తలను ప్రారంభిద్దాం. కరోనా నియంత్రించేందుకు ప్రతి ఒక్కరూ మాస్క్ను తప్పనిసరిగా ధరించాలి. ముక్కు నోరు కప్పించేలా సరైన పద్ధతిలో మాస్క్ను ధరించాలి. తరచూ చేతులను శుభ్రం చేసుకోవాలి. వ్యక్తిగత పరిశుభ్రతను పాటిస్తూ భౌతిక దూరాన్ని తప్పక పాటించాలి. అర్హులందరూ వ్యాక్సిన్ వేయించుకోవాలి. నిబంధనలను పాటిద్దాం, కరోనాను జయిద్దాం. ఇప్పుడు హెడ్లైన్స్ చూద్దాం. ప్రధానమంత్రి మన్ కీ బాత్ 100వ సంచిక రేపు ఉదయం 11 గంటలకు తెలుగు అనువాదం వెనువెంటనే దూరదర్శన్ సప్తగిరి యాదగిరిలలో ప్రసారం. దేశవ్యాప్తంగా రేడియో ప్రసారాలను ప్రజలకు మరింత చేరువ చేసేలా కేంద్రం మరో ముందడుగు. 84 జిల్లాల్లో 91 కొత్త 100 వాట్ ఎఫ్ఎం ట్రాన్స్మిటర్లను ఆవిష్కరించిన ప్రధాని మోదీ. కొత్త ట్రాన్స్మిటర్లతో దేశవ్యాప్తంగా లబ్ధి పొందనున్న 2 కోట్ల మంది ప్రజలు. రాష్ట్ర వ్యాప్తంగా మే 9 నుంచి జగనన్నకు చెబుదాం ప్రత్యేక కార్యక్రమం. ప్రజలకు నాణ్యమైన సేవలు అందించడమే కార్యక్రమ లక్ష్యమన్న ముఖ్యమంత్రి జగన్మోహన్ రెడ్డి. ఆపరేషన్ కావేరితో సూడాన్ నుంచి సురక్షితంగా స్వదేశానికి చేరుకుంటున్న భారతీయులు. ఢిల్లీ, బెంగళూరుకు 754 మంది చేరుకున్నారన్న విదేశాంగ శాఖ. ఐపీఎల్ పోరులో పంజాబ్ కింగ్స్ జట్టుపై 56 పరుగుల తేడాతో విజయం సాధించిన లక్నో సూపర్ జైంట్స్ జట్టు. 40 బంతుల్లో 72 పరుగులు చేసిన లక్నో బ్యాట్స్మెన్ మార్కస్ స్టోయినిస్. వార్తల్లోని వివరాలు. దేశవ్యాప్తంగా రేడియో ప్రసారాలను ప్రజలకు మరింత చేరువ చేసే లక్ష్యంతో కేంద్ర ప్రభుత్వం మరో ముందడుగు వేసింది. దేశవ్యాప్తంగా 18 రాష్ట్రాలు, 2 కేంద్రపాలిత ప్రాంతాల్లోని 84 జిల్లాల్లో 91 కొత్త 100 వాట్ ఎఫ్ఎం ట్రాన్స్మిటర్లను ప్రధానమంత్రి నరేంద్ర మోదీ శుక్రవారం ఢిల్లీ నుంచి వీడియో కాన్ఫరెన్స్ ద్వారా ఆవిష్కరించారు. ఈ సందర్భంగా ప్రధాని మాట్లాడుతూ ప్రతి పౌరుడు సాంకేతిక పరిజ్ఞానాన్ని పెంపొందించుకోవాలని సూచించారు. సాంకేతికతను పెంపొందించుకునేందుకు ప్రభుత్వం నిరంతరం కృషి చేస్తోందన్నారు. దేశంలో సాంకేతిక విప్లవంతో రేడియో కొత్త రూపు సంతరించుకుందన్నారు. డిజిటల్ ఇండియా ఆన్లైన్ ఎఫ్ఎం ద్వారా కొత్త శ్రోతలను ఆదరించిందన్నారు. సకాలంలో సమాచారాన్ని అందించడం, వ్యవసాయానికి సంబంధించిన వాతావరణ సూచనలు, మహిళా స్వయం సహాయక బృందాలను కొత్త మార్కెట్లతో అనుసంధానించడంలో ఎఫ్ఎం ట్రాన్స్మిటర్లు కీలక పాత్ర పోషిస్తాయన్నారు. త్వరలో ప్రసారం కానున్న మన్ కీ బాత్ 100వ ఎపిసోడ్ గురించి మాట్లాడుతూ రేడియోతో తప్ప మరే ఇతర మాధ్యమం ద్వారా దేశవ్యాప్తంగా ప్రజలతో లోతైన అనుబంధం సాధ్యం కాదని చెప్పారు.
देश के 85 जिलों के 2 करोड़ लोगों के लिए उपहार की तरह है। एक तरह से इस आयोजन में भारत की विविधता और अलग अलग रंगों की एक झलक भी है। जिन जिलों को कवर किया जा रहा है उसमें एस्पिरेशनल डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स, एस्पिरेशनल ब्लॉक्स, उनको भी सविशेष इसका लाभ मिल रहा है। इसका काफी लाभ हमारे नॉर्थ ईस्ट के भाई बहनों को होगा, युवा मित्रों को होगा। इसके लिए उन्हें मैं विशेष तौर पर बधाई देता हूं। साथियों, जब बात रेडियो और एफएम की होती है तो हम जिस पीढ़ी के लोग हैं, हम सबका रिश्ता एक भावुक श्रोता का भी है। और मेरे लिए तो ये भी खुशी है कि मेरा रिश्ता एक होस्ट का भी बन गया है।
దేశంలో రేడియో ప్రసారాలను ప్రజలకు మరింత చేరువ చేసే లక్ష్యంతో దేశవ్యాప్తంగా 18 రాష్ట్రాలు, 2 కేంద్రపాలిత ప్రాంతాల్లోని 84 జిల్లాల్లో 91 కొత్త 100 వాట్ ఎఫ్ఎం ట్రాన్స్మిటర్లను ప్రధానమంత్రి నరేంద్ర మోదీ నిన్న ఆవిష్కరించారు. వర్చువల్ విధానం ద్వారా జరిగిన ఈ కార్యక్రమంలో పాల్గొన్న కేంద్ర సమాచార ప్రసార శాఖ మంత్రి అనురాగ్ సింగ్ ఠాకూర్ మాట్లాడుతూ ఎఫ్ఎం స్టేషన్ల ద్వారా ప్రసారమయ్యే కార్యక్రమాలు వివిధ వర్గాల ప్రజలకు ఎంతో ప్రయోజనకరంగా ఉంటాయన్నారు. ప్రతి నెల ప్రధానమంత్రి నరేంద్ర మోదీ తన మనసులోని భావాలను దేశ ప్రజలతో పంచుకుంటున్న మన్ కీ బాత్ కార్యక్రమం ద్వారా రేడియోకి పునర్వైభవం లభించిందన్నారు.
आभार प्रकट करता हूं। ये 2 यूनियन टेरिटरीज और 18 राज्यों के कोने कोने तक 2 करोड़ से ज्यादा लोगों तक एफएम की कवरेज को बढ़ावा देगा और उन तक सरकार की उपलब्धियों, नीतियों को हमारे किसानों के कार्यक्रमों को, मनोरंजन के कार्यक्रमों को, खेल की गतिविधियों को, उद्योग को और बाकी सब जानकारियों को पहुंचाने का एक बहुत बड़ा माध्यम भी होगा। 100 वॉट के इन ट्रांसमीटर्स के माध्यम से हर ट्रांसमीटर लगभग 12 से 15 किलोमीटर का एरिया कवर करता है और हजारों वर्ग किलोमीटर इससे कवर होगा। आदरणीय प्रधानमंत्री जी, हालांकि रेडियो की शुरुआत तो 1930 में हुई और 1936 में ऑल इंडिया रेडियो बना, लेकिन जिस तरह से आपने एनालॉग से डिजिटाइजेशन की ओर जाने का निर्णय 2017 में किया और आपने कहा कि जन जन तक, दूर सुदूर गांव तक रेडियो की सुविधा को पहुंचाना चाहिए, ऑल इंडिया रेडियो ने, आकाशवाणी ने उस दिशा में कदम उठाए और हमें सबसे बड़ा बल तब मिला जब आपने मन की बात का कार्यक्रम की शुरुआत की। अक्टूबर 2014 में विजयदशमी के दिन जब आपने इसकी शुरुआत की, उसी पहले कार्यक्रम से देश के लोगों ने इंतजार किया अगले महीने के रविवार का कि कब उसको सुनेंगे। 14 मिनट से 19 मिनट, फिर 23 मिनट, अब 30 मिनट का एक कार्यक्रम 99 एपिसोड अपनी पूरी कर चुका है। और मुझे कहते हुए प्रसन्नता है, एक सर्वे में अभी पाया गया कि 100 करोड़ भारतवासी ऐसे हैं जिन्होंने कभी ना कभी मन की बात को सुना है और 23 करोड़ से ज्यादा ऐसे जो हर महीने इसको सुनते हैं, 45 करोड़ ऐसे जो इसको अपना हर महीने सुनने की आदत बनाना चाहते हैं। और सबसे बड़ी बात मेरे लिए यह है कि भारत की बहुत बड़ी तादाद में युवा आबादी 65% के लगभग मन की बात को सुनते हैं।
దేశవ్యాప్తంగా రేడియో ప్రసారాలను ప్రజలకు మరింత చేరువ చేసే లక్ష్యంతో 18 రాష్ట్రాలు, 2 కేంద్రపాలిత ప్రాంతాల్లోని 84 జిల్లాల్లో 91 కొత్త 100 వాట్ ఎఫ్ఎం ట్రాన్స్మిటర్లను వీడియో కాన్ఫరెన్స్ ద్వారా ప్రధాని శుక్రవారం ఢిల్లీలో ఆవిష్కరించిన సందర్భంగా ఎఫ్ఎం ట్రాన్స్మిటర్ల ప్రయోజనాలపై ప్రసార భారతి ఓ లఘు చిత్రాన్ని రూపొందించింది.
जब समय सीमित हो तो ये तय करना बहुत महत्वपूर्ण हो जाता है कि हमारी दिशा क्या होगी, हमारी कार्यशैली क्या होगी। आज चुनौती ये नहीं है कि आप कितने एफिशिएंट हैं, बल्कि चुनौती ये तय करने में है कि जहां जो डेफिशिएंसी है वो कैसे दूर होगी।
कवर द अनकवर्ड। प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी का ये संकल्प रोज नई सिद्धि हासिल कर रहा है। इसी दिशा में वंचित इलाकों तक आकाशवाणी की पहुंच लगातार बढ़ रही है। देश के वो क्षेत्र जो अभी तक AIR FM कवरेज से वंचित थे, ऐसे 91 जगहों को चिन्हित कर 100 वॉट के FM स्टेशनों का शुभारंभ हो रहा है। AIR FM की नई पहल से 2 करोड़ लोगों को सीधे लाभ होगा और कवरेज में 35,000 वर्ग किलोमीटर की वृद्धि होगी। लोगों तक सटीक सूचनाएं और स्वस्थ मनोरंजन की पहुंच बढ़ेगी। आकांक्षी जिले हों या वामपंथ उग्रवाद से प्रभावित क्षेत्र, दूर सुदूर सीमावर्ती क्षेत्र हो या ऐसे इलाके जहां अभी तक AIR FM स्टेशन नहीं था, अब मिलेगा उन्हें भी अपना नया स्टेशन, जिससे स्थानीय भाषाओं को और भी समृद्धि मिलेगी। वहीं लोक संस्कृति और लोक कलाओं का संरक्षण और संवर्धन होगा। इन प्रयासों से सूचना क्रांति की सदी में अब तय होगा सटीक और भरोसेमंद सूचनाओं से सुशासन और विकास का रास्ता।
रेडियो एक ऐसा सरल माध्यम है कि मैं दूर दूर तक पहुंच पाऊंगा, गरीब से गरीब के घर तक पहुंच जाऊंगा, क्योंकि मेरे देश की ताकत गरीब की झोपड़ी में है, मेरी देश की ताकत गांव में है, मेरी देश की ताकत माताओं, बहनों, नौजवानों में है, मेरे देश की ताकत किसानों में है। मैं आप ही के भरोसे भारत आगे बढ़ेगा, ये विश्वास व्यक्त कर रहा हूं। आपकी शक्ति में भरोसा है, इसलिए मुझे भारत के भविष्य में भरोसा है।
ये है अमृत काल का भारत, जहां संपर्क, संचार, सूचना का रोज नया विस्तार है। नए भारत के रंग अब आपके शहर में नए रेडियो AIR FM के संग।
ప్రధానమంత్రి నరేంద్ర మోదీ తన మనసులోని భావాలను దేశ ప్రజలతో పంచుకునే మన్ కీ బాత్ 100వ సంచిక రేపు ఉదయం 11 గంటలకు ప్రసారమవుతుంది. ఆకాశవాణి సమన్వయంతో దూరదర్శన్ ఛానళ్లు మన్ కీ బాత్ కార్యక్రమాన్ని ప్రసారం చేస్తాయి. ఈ కార్యక్రమ తెలుగు అనువాదం వెనువెంటనే దూరదర్శన్ సప్తగిరి యాదగిరిలో ప్రసారమవుతుంది. రాష్ట్ర వ్యాప్తంగా మే 9 నుంచి జగనన్నకు చెబుదాం కార్యక్రమాన్ని ప్రారంభిస్తున్నట్లు ముఖ్యమంత్రి జగన్మోహన్ రెడ్డి పేర్కొన్నారు. దీనికోసం 1902 హెల్ప్ లైన్ నెంబర్ ఏర్పాటు చేసినట్లు ముఖ్యమంత్రి తెలిపారు. దీనిపై ఇప్పటికే పలుమార్లు సమీక్షలు చేశామని అన్నారు. జిల్లా కలెక్టర్లు ఎస్పీలతో జగనన్నకు చెబుదాం, పేదలందరికీ ఇళ్లు, జగనన్న భూ హక్కు, భూరక్ష పథకం, నాడు నేడుపై ముఖ్యమంత్రి శుక్రవారం సమీక్షా సమావేశం నిర్వహించారు. అనంతరం ముఖ్యమంత్రి మాట్లాడుతూ జగనన్నకు చెబుదాం కార్యక్రమం కోసం 1902 హెల్ప్ లైన్ నెంబర్ ఏర్పాటు చేసినట్లు తెలిపారు. స్పందనకు మరింత మెరుగైన రూపమే జగనన్నకు చెబుదామన్నారు. ప్రజలకు నాణ్యమైన సేవలను అందించడమే ఈ కార్యక్రమ లక్ష్యమని పేర్కొన్నారు.
All these levels you have project monitoring units regularly to follow up and monitor the redressal. This is something new which Spandana does not have, which we are bringing it up here in Jagannath Chabudam program to help you and to assist you, to ensure that the very purpose, that is the quality, is protected. The very purpose of this entire program is quality redressal. And to achieve that purpose, these project monitoring units are going to play a very, very critical role. The fact that we are lending our name to this program itself means that there is a direct connect with the Chief Minister. The helpline would consist of multiple feedback loops. So regularly there will be a call center here operating from the CMO, which will periodically take feedback. You should also ensure that there is a wide publicity given to this telephone number as well.
ముఖ్యమంత్రి వైఎస్ జగన్మోహన్ రెడ్డి మే నెల 3వ తేదీన విజయనగరం జిల్లాలో పర్యటించనున్నారు. తన పర్యటనలో భాగంగా భోగాపురంలో నిర్మించిన విమానాశ్రయానికి ముఖ్యమంత్రి శంకుస్థాపన చేస్తారు. ముఖ్యమంత్రి పర్యటనను పురస్కరించుకుని జిల్లా ఎస్పీ ఎం దీపిక భద్రతా చర్యలపై అధికారులతో సమీక్ష నిర్వహించారు. అనంతరం జిల్లా కలెక్టర్ నాగలక్ష్మితో కలిసి భోగాపురం విమానాశ్రయంలో ఏర్పాటు చేస్తున్న సభాస్థలిని పరిశీలించారు.
హైవే కానీ బ్లాక్ అయితే లేకపోతే బస్సెస్ ఎక్కడైనా స్టాండ్ అయిపోతే మనకి క్రిటిసిజం వస్తుంది కానీ. సో దానికోసం అయితే మన డిస్ట్రిక్ట్ ఫోర్స్ ఎవరైతే ఉన్నారో వాళ్ళని కూడా మనం ఏ పాయింట్స్ అయితే మనం క్రిటికల్ అనుకుంటున్నామో వాటిలో మీ అందరినీ కూడా డిప్లాయ్ చేస్తాం జరిగింది. పీస్ ఇన్స్పెక్టర్ అండ్ ఎవాల్యుయేషన్. సో మీ అందరికి మీకు ఏం డ్యూటీస్ ఇస్తున్నామో చెప్తాము. దాని తర్వాత ఒకసారి మనం గ్రౌండ్ లో వెళ్ళి చూసుకోండి మీకు ఎక్కడెక్కడ ఇచ్చామని. దీని తర్వాత మీకు ఏదైనా ఫీడ్బ్యాక్ ఉంటే ఇమీడియట్లీ కాలెంట్ అయింది. ఏదైతే సీఎంస్ రూట్ ఉందో ఆ రూట్ లో దే వాంట్ మొబిలైజేషన్, దాంట్లో దే వాంట్ జనాల్ని పక్కన నుంచో పెడతారు. సర్వీస్ రోడ్ లోకి బస్సెస్ ఇంకా విఐపీ వెహికల్స్ వెళ్ళాలి. విఐపీ వెహికల్స్ బస్సెస్ కూడా హైవే మీదకి వెళ్ళాలి.
తెలుగుదేశం పార్టీ వ్యవస్థాపకులు సినీ నటుడు నందమూరి తారక రామారావు సత్య జయంతి ఉత్సవాలు విజయవాడలో శుక్రవారం ప్రారంభమయ్యాయి. ఈ సత్య జయంతి ఉత్సవాల అంకురార్పణకు తమిళ నటుడు రజనీకాంత్ విశిష్ట అతిథిగా హాజరుకాగా తెలుగుదేశం అధినేత చంద్రబాబు నాయుడు ముఖ్య అతిథిగా హాజరయ్యారు. హిందూపురం శాసనసభ్యులు ఎన్టీ రామారావు కుమారుడు బాలకృష్ణ, ఇతర కుటుంబ సభ్యులు పాల్గొన్నారు. ఎన్టీఆర్ చారిత్రక ప్రసంగాలపై 2 పుస్తకాలను విడుదల చేశారు. ఈ సందర్భంగా ఎన్టీ రామారావు విగ్రహానికి పుష్పాంజలి ఘటించారు. అనంతరం బాలకృష్ణ మాట్లాడుతూ ఎన్టీఆర్ సినీ రంగంలోనే కాక రాజకీయాల్లో కూడా రాణించారన్నారు.
అభినందన తెలియజేసుకుంటూ మరి యొక్క కార్యక్రమం ప్రతి ఇంటిలోనూ ఒక పండుగగా మనం ఎలాగైతే పండుగ జరుపుకుంటామో, ఒక సంక్రాంతి లేకపోతే ఒక దీపావళి లేకపోతే ఒక ఇటువంటి పండుగల్లో ఇది ఒక పండుగగా వాళ్ళందరూ ఆయన యొక్క శత జయంతి పండుగను జరుపుకుంటున్నందుకు అందరూ కూడా నా అభినందన తెలియజేసుకుంటూ, అలాగే ఆయన చేసిన సేవలకి మనం ఎంతో రుణపడి ఉన్నాం ఆయనకి. అలాగే ఈ యొక్క కమిటీ ఏదైతే ఏర్పడి ఈ యొక్క కార్యక్రమాన్ని జరుగుతుందో ఆ కమిటీ సభ్యులందరూ కూడా పారా అశోక్ గారికి అందరూ కూడా వాళ్ళు చేస్తున్న కృషికి నా అభినందన తెలియజేసుకుంటూ మరి ఈ యొక్క కార్యక్రమానికి విచ్చేసే ప్రతి ఒక్కరు కూడా మీ యొక్క శ్రద్ధాంజలిని గడించడానికి విచ్చేసే ప్రతి ఒక్కరు కూడా నా కృతజ్ఞతలు, నా అభినందనలు, నా కుటుంబ సభ్యుల తరఫున అందరూ కూడా నా అభినందన.
రాష్ట్ర గవర్నర్ జస్టిస్ అబ్దుల్ నజీర్ తిరుపతి పర్యటనలో భాగంగా శుక్రవారం వేద విశ్వవిద్యాలయం 7వ స్నాతకోత్సవ వేడుకల్లో పాల్గొన్నారు. ఈ సందర్భంగా 550 మంది విద్యార్థులకు పట్టాలు ప్రదానం చేయడంతో పాటు 2 మహోపాధ్యాయ 2 వాచస్పతి పురస్కారాలను జస్టిస్ అబ్దుల్ నజీర్ అందించారు. ఈ సందర్భంగా గవర్నర్ మాట్లాడుతూ మహోపాధ్యాయ వాచస్పతి పురస్కార గ్రహీతలకు అభినందనలు తెలిపారు. వారి రంగాల్లో ప్రతిభను నిరూపించుకున్నారన్నారు.
Congratulate the recipients of honoris causa, Mahopadhyaya and Vachaspati titles, and I consider it is as a recognition of their proven excellence in their respective fields related to the Vedic knowledge and tradition. I extend my best wishes to the outstanding scholars. Learned members, it is well known that India or Bharat has been popular as the powerhouse of knowledge ever since the dawn of human civilization. The uniqueness of Indian knowledge system lies in the quintessential Vedic sources originated in this subcontinent. The Vedas are the ageless treasures of knowledge and encompass several disciplines essential for human living. The huge volumes of Veda Samhitas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, Upanishads, Shruta, Graya, Sulabha, Sutra texts, orthodox systems of philosophy, Itihasas, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata Puranas, text in 64 fine arts, Agama texts dealing with standard architectural techniques, specialized lexicons, that is Kosha Granthas, and various Shastra texts deal with the living crafts of human society, and even today they are available name-wise and title-wise.
నంద్యాల జిల్లాలో మిరప పంట విస్తీర్ణం పెరుగుతున్న నేపథ్యంలో నకిలీ మిరప విత్తనాలు అరికట్టేందుకు కార్యాచరణ ప్రణాళిక రూపొందించాలని జిల్లా వ్యవసాయ మండలి చైర్మన్ వంగాల భరత్ కుమార్ రెడ్డి అధికారులను కోరారు. కలెక్టరేట్లో జరిగిన వ్యవసాయ సలహా మండలి సమావేశంలో జిల్లా జాయింట్ కలెక్టర్ నిశాంతి, మార్క్ఫెడ్ చైర్మన్ పిపి నాగిరెడ్డి తదితరులు హాజరై నేచురల్ ఫార్మింగ్ విధానంపై రూపొందించిన పోస్టర్లను ఆవిష్కరించారు. అనంతరం భరత్ కుమార్ మాట్లాడుతూ పలు నర్సరీల్లో మిరప విత్తనాలను ఉత్పత్తి చేస్తున్నట్లు తమ దృష్టికి వచ్చిందని వీటిని అరికట్టేందుకు తగు చర్యలు తీసుకుంటున్నామన్నారు.
మొదటిది చిల్లీ సాగు విపరీతంగా పెరుగుతూ ఉంది కాబట్టి కంపెనీలు హైబ్రిడ్ వెరైటీస్ ఉన్నటువంటి కంపెనీలు బ్లాక్ మార్కెట్ చేసేటటువంటి పరిస్థితి కనపడతా ఉంది. దాన్ని అమాంతం రేట్లు పెంచడం, ఆర్టిఫిషియల్గా స్కేర్సిటీ క్రియేట్ చేయడం ఈ విధంగా జరుగుతూ ఉంది. దీన్ని అరికట్టడానికి ఒక స్క్వాడ్ను స్పెషల్గా వేసి జిల్లాలో సీడ్ డీలర్లను కంట్రోల్లో చేయాలని చెప్పి ఒక విన్నపం చేయడం జరిగింది. అలాగే సీడ్ నర్సరీలలో కూడా చాలా ఫ్రాడ్లు జరుగుతూ ఉన్నాయి. దాని మీద కూడా హార్టికల్చర్ డిపార్ట్మెంటు అన్ని నర్సరీలను ఇన్స్పెక్షన్ చేసి వారు ఎక్కడ సీడ్ తెచ్చినారు, ఏ రైతులకు వాళ్ళు నర్సరీలో సాగు చేస్తున్నారు, ఏ రైతులకు అమ్మినారు అనేటువంటి పూర్తి వివరాలు రికార్డు మెయింటైన్ చేయాలని కూడా ఈ సందర్భంగా గుర్తు చేయడం జరిగింది. అలాగే ఈకేవైసీలు పెండింగ్ ఉన్నవి అందరివి కూడా ఈకేవైసీలు పూర్తి చేయాలని నేను తెలియజేయడం జరిగింది. తర్వాత పచ్చిరొట్ట ఎరువులకు ఇప్పుడు అనువు కాబట్టి వర్షాలు మొదలైతేనే పచ్చిరొట్ట సీడు సబ్సిడీలో ఇచ్చేటటువంటి పచ్చిరొట్ట పంటల యొక్క సీడు రెడీగా ఏర్పాటు చేయాలని చెప్పి ఏపీ సీడ్స్ను ఆదేశించడం జరిగింది.
గ్రామ వార్డు సచివాలయంలో కూడా విద్యుత్ సంబంధిత ఫిర్యాదుల కోసం ప్రత్యేక పోర్టల్ను తిరుపతిలోని కలెక్టరేట్లో రాష్ట్ర విద్యుత్ శాఖ మంత్రి పెద్దిరెడ్డి రామచంద్రారెడ్డి ప్రారంభించారు. ఏపీఎస్పీడీసీఎల్ పరిధిలో సచివాలయాల్లో కూడా విద్యుత్ ఫిర్యాదులను స్వీకరించనున్నారు. ఈ సందర్భంగా మంత్రి పెద్దిరెడ్డి రామచంద్రారెడ్డి మాట్లాడుతూ గత ఏడాది అత్యధికంగా ఒక్క రోజులో 232 మిలియన్ యూనిట్లు అందిస్తే ఈ ఏడాది 248 మిలియన్ యూనిట్లు అందించామని, ఎక్కడా విద్యుత్ అంతరాయం లేకుండా సరఫరా చేస్తున్నామన్నారు. రాష్ట్ర అభివృద్ధికి ఇది ఒక నిదర్శనమని, పరిశ్రమలకు నాణ్యమైన విద్యుత్ అందిస్తున్నామన్నారు.
263.3 MUలు ఇస్తా ఉన్నాం. అది కూడా ఎవర్ టైం హై అని చెప్పబడింది. ముందుంటే 1/3 అలా పెరిగింది. పెరిగేదే కాకుండా 24 గంటలు నిరంతరం పరిస్థితి ఈరోజు మా ప్రీతం ముఖ్యమంత్రి జగన్మోహన్ రెడ్డి గారి ఆధ్వర్యంలో ఇది సాధ్యమవుతా ఉంది. 42 సేవలు ఇంతకుముందు గ్రామ సచివాలయంలో రైతులకు అక్కడ కన్జ్యూమర్స్ అందరికీ కూడా అందిస్తా ఉన్నాం. దానికి తోడు ఇప్పుడు అదనంగా 12 సేవలు ఇవ్వడం జరుగుతుంది. ఇవన్నీ కూడా అందరికీ కూడా మెసేజ్ పోతుంది కాబట్టి తప్పకుండా అటెండ్ అయ్యి దీన్ని సమర్థవంతంగా అక్కడ పనిచేయడానికి ఉపయోగపడే విధంగా ఈరోజు యాప్ ఓపెన్ చేస్తా ఉన్నాం. ఈ యాప్ను అందరూ కూడా ఉపయోగించుకోవాలని మీ ద్వారా కన్జ్యూమర్స్ అందరినీ కూడా నేను కోరుకుంటా ఉన్నాను.
కిడ్నీ మోసాలపై రాష్ట్ర వ్యాప్తంగా పూర్తి స్థాయిలో నిఘా పెట్టామని రాష్ట్ర వైద్య ఆరోగ్య శాఖ మంత్రి విడుదల రజని తెలిపారు. ప్రసార మాధ్యమాల్లో వస్తున్న కిడ్నీ రాకెట్ వార్తలను ప్రభుత్వం తీవ్రంగా పరిగణిస్తోందన్న మంత్రి సంబంధిత ఆసుపత్రుల్లో తనిఖీలు నిర్వహించి ఎవరైనా అక్రమాలకు పాల్పడినట్లు తేలితే వారిపై తగు చర్యలు తీసుకుంటామని హెచ్చరించారు. గ్రామాల్లో శాంతి భద్రతలను కాపాడేందుకు పోలీసులు అన్ని వేళలా అప్రమత్తంగా ఉంటున్నారని ఏలూరు జిల్లా ఎస్పీ మేరీ ప్రశాంతి అన్నారు. శుక్రవారం నూజివీడ్ డివిజన్ పరిధిలో పలు పోలీస్ స్టేషన్లను ఆమె తనిఖీ చేశారు. ఈ సందర్భంగా ఆగిరిపల్లి, నూజివీడ్ పోలీస్ స్టేషన్లో రికార్డులను పరిశీలించి తగు సూచనలు, సలహాలు అందించారు. అనంతరం ఎస్పీ మాట్లాడుతూ పౌరులకు మెరుగైన సేవలందించేందుకు ఫ్రెండ్లీ పోలీసింగ్ విధానాన్ని అవలంబిస్తున్నామన్నారు. కరోనా సమయంలో రాష్ట్రంలో పర్యటించి ప్రజలకు భరోసా కల్పించలేని చంద్రబాబు నాయుడును ప్రజలు నమ్మే స్థితిలో లేరని రాష్ట్ర బీసీ సంక్షేమ శాఖ మంత్రి చెల్లుబోయిన శ్రీనివాస వేణుగోపాలకృష్ణ అన్నారు. డాక్టర్ బీఆర్ అంబేద్కర్ కోనసీమ జిల్లాలోని రామచంద్రపురంలో మంత్రి మీడియాతో మాట్లాడుతూ ప్రస్తుతం రాష్ట్రంలో ప్రజలు సుఖశాంతులతో ఉంటే వారిని హింసించడానికి నారా లోకేష్ పాదయాత్ర చేపట్టారని పేర్కొన్నారు. లోకేష్ పాదయాత్రకు ప్రజల స్పందన కరువైందని అన్నారు.
82 రోజులని ఈరోజు పత్రికా కథనాలు. పాపం లోకేష్ కి ప్రజాదరణ రావటం లేదని వారి తండ్రి ప్రతిపక్ష నాయకుడు చంద్రబాబు నాయుడు ఆయన కూడా ప్రజల దగ్గర తిరుగుతున్నాడు. ప్రజలకు కష్టం వచ్చినప్పుడు నాయకులు అవసరం. మరోసారి చెప్తున్నారు, ప్రజలకు కష్టం వచ్చినప్పుడు నాయకులు అవసరం. ప్రజలు ఇలా సుఖంగా ఉన్నప్పుడు హింసించే వాళ్ళని ఏమంటారనేది ప్రజలు అర్థం చేసుకుంటారు. మీరు కూడా ఆలోచించారు. నేను ఎందుకు చెప్పానంటే ఈ మాట, కరోనా కష్టంలో చంద్రబాబు నాయుడు గాని లోకేష్ గాని ఈ రాష్ట్రంలో కనీస పర్యటన చేయకుండా హైదరాబాద్ లో వాళ్ళ ఇంటికే పరిమితం అయ్యారు. ఈ రాష్ట్రంలో ఎక్కడా కూడా ప్రజలకు భరోసా కల్పించడానికి ఒక్క తెలుగుదేశం నాయకుడు కూడా రోడ్డు మీదకి వచ్చినటువంటి దాఖలాలు లేవు. అంత విపత్తుని తట్టుకుని ప్రజలు సుఖజీవనం సాగిస్తున్నారు. ఈ రాష్ట్రంలో ఉన్నటువంటి పేద వర్గాలకి ఈ ప్రభుత్వం నుంచి సహాయం నేరుగా అందుతుంది. బీసీలకు చేసింది ఏమిటి చర్చిందాం. నువ్వు ఎంతసేపు ఏదో ఎన్నికల ముందు ఎలక్షన్లు వస్తున్నటువంటి గంటలే ఒక నెలల ముందు మాత్రం ఆదరణ పథకం అన్నావు. అవి చేర్చావా? చేర్చలేదే. ఏం ఖర్చు చేసావు? దాంట్లో కేవలం 160 కోట్ల రూపాయలు ఖర్చు చేసి నేను ఏదో పెద్దగా చేశానంటావు. అంటే లక్షలాది కోట్లు ఇవాళ బీసీల కుటుంబాల ఖాతాల్లోకి వేసినటువంటి జగన్మోహన్ రెడ్డికి నీకు పోలిక.
సుడాన్ నుంచి భారతీయుల తరలింపు కోసం చేపట్టిన ఆపరేషన్ కావేరీ వేగంగా కొనసాగుతోంది. శుక్రవారం 362 మందితో కూడిన ప్రత్యేక విమానం బెంగళూరు చేరుకోగా C-17 విమానంలో 392 మంది ఢిల్లీ చేరుకున్నారు. స్వదేశానికి తిరిగి వచ్చిన భారతీయులకు కేంద్ర విదేశాంగ శాఖ సహాయ మంత్రి మురళీధరన్ స్వాగతం పలికారు. ఐపీఎల్ 16వ సీజన్లో భాగంగా శుక్రవారం జరిగిన పోరులో లక్నో సూపర్ జైంట్స్ 56 పరుగుల తేడాతో పంజాబ్ కింగ్స్ ను చిత్తు చేసింది. మొహాలీ వేదికగా జరిగిన ఈ మ్యాచ్లో మొదట బ్యాటింగ్ చేసిన లక్నో నిర్ణీత 20 ఓవర్లలో 5 వికెట్ల నష్టానికి 257 పరుగులు చేసింది. మార్కస్ స్టోయినిస్ 40 బంతుల్లో 72 పరుగులు, కెయిల్ మయర్స్ 24 బంతుల్లో 54 పరుగులు, నికోలస్ పూరన్ 19 బంతుల్లో 45 పరుగులు చేశారు. 258 పరుగుల లక్ష్య ఛేదంలో పంజాబ్ 19.5 ఓవర్లో 201 పరుగులకు ఆలౌట్ అయింది. లీగ్లో భాగంగా ఈరోజు కోల్కతాతో గుజరాత్, ఢిల్లీతో హైదరాబాద్ జట్లు తలపడనున్నాయి. ఈ వార్తలు ఇంతటితో సమాప్తం. నమస్కారం.
Hi, I'm Jade. I've come from Goa. This is my second trip to Sikkim, but my first trip to this particular holy place. It is completely empty. The weather is really beautiful, and it's a very relaxing place to visit. Scenically, it's very beautiful. Not a lot of people here, so it's nice to relax and explore this place. It's completely different. This is a nice place for slow travelers. In Goa, it's all about food, parties, beaches, a lot of noise. Over here, it's very peaceful. It's just for people who like to, relax. Just some kind of break from your daily schedule, where you don't want to do a lot of things. You don't want to pack your day with so many things. It's a nice place to visit for that.
Worshipped by both Buddhists and Hindus, it attracts many visitors and pilgrims from all around the world. Legends has it that the birds around this natural lake safeguard this celestial lake from any intruder, be it a leaf on the surface of the lake or anything. Wonders always do come in small packages, traveling through this picturesque landscape tucked away in the lap of the mighty Himalayas.
Hello, you're watching Global Scan on DD India and I'm Preeti. We are back once again with a fresh dose of all that which caught the attention of the world and grabbed headlines. In the next 1 hour, just sit back and watch how we get you all the events that change the dynamics of the world. Countries continue to make frantic efforts to evacuate their citizens from Sudan, where the situation remains fluid and tense. Let's finish this job, says US President Joe Biden as he files documents announcing his 2024 presidential run. And with routine gunfights taking place between police officers and the gangs, the situation in Haiti remains tense. India's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ruchira Kamboj, made a vocal pitch for a major course correction as she called for India to be made a permanent UNSC member. Back home, Prime Minister Modi launched a number of social welfare projects. If all this has caught your attention, then let me remind you that this is just a sneak peek of the 1 hour long detailed synopsis of the events that grabbed the attention across the world. So let's embark upon this journey ahead with me. We get you the top stories first. Clashes continue between Sudan's army and RSF on Khartoum's outskirts. Countries across the world evacuating their citizens from Sudan. World Health Organization expects more deaths to occur in Sudan due to the outbreaks of disease and a lack of essential services and intense fighting. India's Operation Kaveri underway in full swing. IF planes bringing back Indians stranded in war-torn Sudan. Ministry of External Affairs constantly monitoring the situation in Sudan since the conflict began, says there are approximately 3,500 Indians and 1,000 PIOs in Sudan. US-South Korea ties at a new high. President Joe Biden and South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol reach a new deal that includes plans to deploy a US nuclear submarine in South Korea. Biden says North Korean actions are blatant violation of sanctions. China warns US, South Korea against provoking confrontation with North Korea. US President Joe Biden officially launches his bid for a second White House term in 2024. Vows to fight against attempts to limit women's health care. Says it's his job to defend American democracy. Death toll in Kenya, cult case more than 89 as more bodies exhumed from the Shakahola forest in eastern Kenya. With aching hearts, Kenyans seek relatives among starvation cult victims. All right, those are the top stories. Let's get started. We'll get you the updates from Sudan first. The world watches in horror as Sudan was again rocked by fresh violence on Thursday, despite a United States brokered ceasefire being in effect. The Sudanese army pounded paramilitaries in the capital Khartoum with airstrikes on the 13th day of the conflict, while deadly fighting flared in Darfur. The Egyptian Foreign Ministry said on Thursday that more than 14,000 Sudanese refugees have crossed the border into Egypt since the deadly fighting erupted in their country in mid-April. The fighting in Sudan has left at least 512 people dead and has injured 4,193 according to the Health Ministry figures, although the real death toll is likely to be much higher.
Fighting continues in parts of Sudan despite a 72-hour ceasefire largely holding. Locals are suffering as there is no fuel, people are struggling to access food and money, and there is also lack of doctors.
I'm Dr. Hovida Ahmed Mohammed Aslaham at Al-Ban Al-Jadid Hospital in East Lane. Staff members are now here at the hospital. A number of injured people are still here. Relief items are decreasing. Medical staffs who worked on the first day are still here after 14 days because medical staff members cannot reach us because the roads are not safe. Relief items are very much limited. Injured people are still coming to the hospital. We can call all rights humanitarians organization to force the two conflicting parties to stop the war.
Food supplies, gas and medicine are running low in Sudan's capital of Khartoum. Local businesses also said that it could be catastrophic if the fighting between Sudan's army and a paramilitary force continued.
I have chronic disease, diabetes and hypertension. Since the beginning of these events, I have not found an open pharmacy. By coincidence, I found this pharmacy open and thank God I found the medicine.
Stories of escape and exodus are becoming more and more common among local residents. Meet this 12-year-old Khalid Nimr. He was trapped in his father's workplace for 3 days and cut off from electricity and water due to the clashes. In a constant state of fear, the sound of bullets and a boiling hot environment due to an electricity shortage, Nimr was deprived of sleep. He eventually managed to escape the besieged building with the adults and share his inconceivable experience.
It was 9 in the morning and I was sitting and playing video games, but suddenly I heard the sound of gunshots. At first I thought it was a normal sound. I went to the window to make sure. I found it coming from a far place. But soon the situation changed and the rapid support force appeared near our building and electricity was cut off from that moment.
A British national has described his horrific experience in Sudan on Wednesday as he arrived at London's Stansted Airport. Peter Madawi said that being in the country as clashes continued between the army and paramilitary group was intimidating.
It was, how can I say, I mean, it's quite horrific going through being shot, being intimidated. It wasn't easy, but we got through, thank you. It's difficult to say how stomach churning it was. You know, you lose appetite, you're constantly stressed, you don't know what's going to happen. Am I going to make it? Am I going to... I think it was glad by the time we got to the airport and we saw the British forces, the British planes, it was very, very tension relieving.
Majority of Sudanese escaping their country have fled to Chad. Sudan erupted into warfare on the 15th of April, derailing a transition to civilian rule since when clashes between the army and paramilitaries have turned residential areas into battlefields. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
The relentless violence continues in Sudan in spite of repeated calls for peace by the international world. The hopes for freedom from the shackles of decades-old autocracy, internal conflict and economic isolation have now turned into bloodshed and misery for the Sudanese people. In the report ahead, we get you a quick backgrounder to the crisis that stares at Sudan.
Fighting has erupted in Sudan's capital Khartoum and at other sites across the country as powerful rival military factions battle for control, increasing the risk of a nationwide civil war. Tension had been building up for months between Sudan's army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, which together toppled the civilian government in an October 2021 coup. The friction was brought to a head by an internationally backed plan to launch a new transition with civilian parties. A final deal was due to be signed earlier in April on the 4th anniversary of the overthrow of the long-ruling autocrat Omar al-Bashir in a popular uprising. Both the army and the RSF were required to cede power under the plan, and two issues proved particularly contentious. One was the timetable for the RSF to be integrated into the regular armed forces. The second was when the army would be formally placed under civilian oversight. When fighting broke out on April 15, both sides blamed the other for provoking the violence. The army accused the RSF of illegal mobilization in preceding days, and the RSF, as it moved on key strategic sites in Khartoum, said the army had tried to seize full power in a plot with Bashir loyalists. The main players on the ground are the protagonists in the power struggle. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, head of the army and leader of Sudan's ruling council since 2019, and his deputy on the council, RSF leader General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, commonly known as Hamediti. As the plan for a new transition developed, Hamediti aligned himself more closely with civilian parties from a coalition, the Forces for Freedom and Change, that shared power with the military between Bashir's overthrow and the 2021 coup. The popular uprising had raised hopes that Sudan and its population of 46 million could emerge from decades of autocracy, internal conflict and economic isolation under Bashir. Conflict could not only destroy those hopes but destabilize a volatile region bordering the Sahel, the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa. It could also play into competition for influence in the region between Russia and the United States, and between regional powers who have courted different actors in Sudan. Western powers, including the United States, had swung behind a transition towards democratic elections following Bashir's overthrow. They suspended financial support following the coup, then backed the plan for a new transition and a civilian government. Energy-rich powers, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, have also sought to shape events in Sudan, seeing the transition between Bashir's rule as a way to roll back Islamist influence and bolster stability in the region. Gulf states have pursued investments in sectors including agriculture, where Sudan holds vast potential, and ports on Sudan's Red Sea coast. International parties called for a ceasefire and a return to dialogue, but there has been little sign of compromise from the warring factions. DD India.
And we told you how countries are making frantic efforts to safely evacuate their citizens from crisis-hit Sudan. And up next, we'll get you details of the evacuation efforts which have been put forth by different countries. On April 25th, India launched Operation Kaveri, and it attempted to bring back the stranded Indians from war-torn Sudan. And as we speak, we tell you that this Operation Kaveri is still in progress. And so far, the 9th batch of 135 Indians arrived at Jeddah by IAFC 130J from Port Sudan to Jeddah. And talking of the efforts which have been put forth by other countries, then Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson has said that Sweden's military completed its evacuation operation from Sudan. And also, the Swedish ministry, however, has highlighted that it will continue to provide consular support to its nationals who are still there in Sudan. Talking of the efforts by Switzerland, that Switzerland has already shut its embassy and evacuated all the Swiss staff and their families. And up next, China's foreign ministry says that most Chinese nationals have been safely evacuated in groups to the neighboring countries. This has been said by China's foreign ministry. Ukraine has said that it has rescued 87 of its citizens, most of them pilots, aircraft technicians and their families. And also, these were among a total of 138 civilians who also included citizens of Georgia and Peru. South Africa has said that it in fact expected the last 12 of its nationals known to be in Sudan to have left on Tuesday. So in a nutshell, the countries have been trying hard to safely evacuate their citizens from crisis-hit Sudan, even as the situation there remains tense and fluid. All right, so that was the gist of the evacuation efforts by different countries in Sudan. And we change focus now. We get you updates from Asia now in our segment, Asia This Week. India's permanent representative to the United Nations in New York, Ruchira Kamboj, has pushed for a major course correction of the UN Security Council. She said that India has been at the forefront of a decades-long effort to reform the UNSC. She said that India deserves to be a permanent UNSC member. She also questioned the effectiveness of the multilateralism to say that it cannot be practiced by defending a charter that makes 5 nations more equal than others.
India's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ruchira Kamboj, has questioned the effectiveness of multilateralism, highlighting the inadequacies of the current system. Speaking at the United Nations Security Council open debate, Ruchira Kamboj asked if multilateralism could be effective if it relied on a charter that elevates 5 nations above the others and allows them to ignore the collective will of the remaining 188 member states. She also questioned the relevance of the principle of "to the victor belong the spoils" in the 21st century.
Can we practice effective multilateralism by defending a charter that makes 5 nations more equal than others and provides to each of those 5 the power to ignore the collective will of the remaining 188 member states? Mr. President, how much longer will we keep decorating effective multilateralism with the intent of reforming multilateralism with only words and mere lip service?
Ruchira Kamboj noted that the multilateral system has failed to respond to contemporary challenges such as the COVID-19 pandemic and ongoing conflict in Ukraine, and that significant global challenges including terrorism, radicalism, climate justice and action.
We are collectively aware of the inadequacies of the multilateral system that has failed to respond to contemporary challenges, whether it be the COVID pandemic or the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Moreover, significant global challenges such as terrorism, radicalism, climate justice and climate action, disruptive non-state actors, debt and several geopolitical contestations continue to undermine global peace and security.
Ruchira Kamboj emphasized the need to widen representation in the United Nations Security Council to more developing countries to enhance its effectiveness and credibility. India, a founding signatory to the United Nations Charter in the year 1945, has been calling for major course correction in global decision-making body. Ruchira Kamboj stressed that if the United Nations continues to perpetuate anachronistic mindsets, the faith people have in it will diminish.
India was a founding signatory to the UN Charter when it was signed on 26 June 1945 in San Francisco. 77 years later, when we see the world's largest democracy along with entire continents of Africa and Latin America being kept out of global decision-making, we rightly call for a major course correction. In this regard, I am happy to note that the recent report of the UNSG's High-Level Advisory Board on Effective Multilateralism has recognized the inevitability of reform of the Security Council and has called for a renewed effort in that direction. To quote from the report, the Summit of the Future is an opportunity to reaffirm our common commitment to the UN Charter and announce a Charter Review Conference focused on Security Council reform.
Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj also highlighted the calls for reforms from more than 70 global leaders in September and quoted India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar, who said that reform is the need of the day. Bureau Report, DD, India.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi flagged off a Vande Bharat train between Thiruvananthapuram and Kasaragod in the southern Indian state of Kerala. He laid the foundation stone and inaugurated projects worth $400 million at Thiruvananthapuram, the capital of Kerala. The Prime Minister also dedicated the Kochi Water Metro to the nation. It connects 10 islands around the city of Kochi through a battery-operated electric hybrid boat for seamless connectivity. The Prime Minister said that the government is a votary of cooperative federalism and that it considers the development of states as a source of the country's development. My colleague Abhishek Singh reports.
वंदे भारत एक्सप्रेस जैसी आधुनिक ट्रेन भी एस्पिरेशनल इंडिया की पहचान है। आज हम ये सेमी हाई स्पीड ट्रेन इसलिए चला पा रहे हैं क्योंकि भारत का रेल नेटवर्क तेजी से बदल रहा है, अधिक स्पीड के लिए तैयार हो रहा है।
A cleaner nation we work, our mission we shall meet. We are the change we seek with every step we take. A cleaner nation we dream, our efforts shall not be vain.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi flagged off Kerala's first Vande Bharat train between Thiruvananthapuram and Kasaragod from Thiruvananthapuram Central Station. The train will cover 11 districts in the state. PM Modi laid the foundation stone and inaugurated various projects worth more than 3,200 crore rupees. He said central government lays emphasis on cooperative federalism and believes that if states develop, it will help in development of the country.
बीते 9 वर्षों में भारत में कनेक्टिविटी के इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के लिए अभूतपूर्व स्पीड और अभूतपूर्व स्केल पर काम किया जा रहा है। इस साल के बजट में भी हमने 10 लाख करोड़ रुपए से अधिक इंफ्रा पर खर्च करना तय किया है। आज हम देश में पब्लिक ट्रांसपोर्ट और लॉजिस्टिक्स सेक्टर का पूरी तरह से कायाकल्प कर रहे हैं।
PM Modi also laid the foundation of various rail projects including redevelopment of Thiruvananthapuram, Kozhikode, Varkala, Sivagiri railway stations, comprehensive development of Thiruvananthapuram area including Nemon and Kochuveli, and increasing of sectional speed of Thiruvananthapuram Shoranur section. PM also inaugurated the Kochi Water Metro, which will connect 10 islands around Kochi.
हमारी सरकार कोऑपरेटिव फेडरलिज्म पर बल देती है, राज्यों के विकास को देश के विकास का सूत्र मानती है। केरला का विकास होगा तो भारत का विकास और तेज होगा।
Prime Minister Modi also laid the foundation stone of a digital science park in Thiruvananthapuram. It is expected to be a key research facility to develop digital products and services by industry and business units in collaboration with the academia. Prime Minister's visit to Kerala was greeted with gusto and exuberance. Large number of people thronged to the streets to get a glimpse of PM in traditional Kerala attire of mundu, shawl and kurta. With Abhishek Singh, Bureau Report, DD India.
Prime Minister laid the foundation stone and dedicated to the nation development projects worth $600 million at Silvassa, the capital of the Union Territory of Dadra and Nagar Haveli. The projects included the dedication of Namo Medical Education and Research Institute. The Prime Minister spoke about the growing cosmopolitanism of Silvassa as it is home to people from every corner of the country. My colleagues Nitendra Singh and Neeraj Singh have filed this report.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision to establish at least one medical college in every district is gaining momentum. The newly dedicated Namo Medical Education and Research Institute in Silvassa is set to provide quality healthcare and medical education to all. What is even more noteworthy is that Prime Minister Modi laid the foundation stone for the project in 2019. Prime Minister Modi also interacted with the construction workers who were part of the construction.
अब यहां से हर वर्ष करीब करीब 150 स्थानीय युवाओं को डॉक्टरी की पढ़ाई करने का अवसर मिल रहा है। कुछ ही वर्षों में, बहुत निकट भविष्य में 1000 जितने डॉक्टर यहीं से तैयार हो जाएंगे। आप कल्पना कीजिए, इतने छोटे से इलाके से 1000 डॉक्टर, इनमें भी हमारे आदिवासी परिवार के युवाओं की संख्या निरंतर बढ़ रही है।
In addition to this, Prime Minister Narendra Modi also inaugurated and laid foundation stone of over 96 projects worth over rupees 4,850 crores in Silvassa and Daman. These include government schools, beautification and strengthening of various roads in Dadar and Nagar Haveli district, shopping complex at Moti Daman and Nani Daman, and augmentation of water supply schemes in Nani Daman. Prime Minister Modi also handed over PMAY cards to beneficiaries.
पिछले 9 वर्षों में हमने देश में एक नई कार्यशैली विकसित की है, नया वर्क कल्चर लाए हैं। अब जिस कार्य की नींव रखी जाती है उसे तेजी से पूरा करने का भी भरसक प्रयास किया जाता है।
Earlier, Prime Minister Modi held a mega road show where thousands gathered on the streets to catch a glimpse of him. Prime Minister Modi dedicated the Devka seafront in Daman, which is expected to boost the local economy and attract more tourists to the region. The 5.45-kilometer seafront was built at a cost of around rupees 165 crores. Prime Minister Modi also inaugurated the Namo Path during his visit. This initiative by the government is set to revolutionize healthcare in India by ensuring access to quality medical education for all. With Nitendra and Neeraj Singh, Bureau Report, India.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Monday addressed the Chintan Shivir of Ministries of Youth Affairs and Sports of States and Union Territories in Imphal. In his address to the gathering, the Prime Minister expressed joy that many athletes from the Northeast had lifted the glory of tricolour by winning medals for the country.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed the Chintan Shivir of Ministers of Youth Affairs and Sports of States and Union Territories in Imphal, capital city of Indian state of Manipur, via video message on Monday. Addressing the gathering, the Prime Minister expressed delight that Chintan Shivir is taking place in Manipur this year, and many sportspersons from the Northeast have raised the glory of the tricolour by winning medals for the country.
नॉर्थ ईस्ट से निकलकर कितने ही खिलाड़ियों ने तिरंगे की शान बढ़ाई है, देश के लिए मेडल्स जीते हैं। देश की खेल परंपरा को आगे बढ़ाने में पूर्वोत्तर और मणिपुर का महत्वपूर्ण योगदान रहा है। यहां के सगोल कांगजेई, थांगता, यूबी लाकपी, मुकना और हियांग तानवा जैसे स्वदेशी खेल अपने आप में बहुत आकर्षक है।
Prime Minister said that it is the responsibility of the government to provide quality sports infrastructure to every talented player.
अपने देश के हर प्रतिभाशाली खिलाड़ी को क्वालिटी स्पोर्ट्स इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर देना हम सभी का दायित्व है। इसके लिए केंद्र सरकार और राज्य सरकार को मिलकर काम करना होगा। खेलो इंडिया स्कीम ने जिला स्तर पर स्पोर्ट्स इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर जरूर कुछ बेहतर किया है, लेकिन अब इस प्रयास को हमें ब्लॉक लेवल पर लेकर जाना है। इसमें प्राइवेट सेक्टर समेत सभी स्टेक होल्डर्स की भागीदारी महत्वपूर्ण है।
Prime Minister Narendra Modi also stressed on further extending help to the players.
आने वाले समय में स्क्वॉश वर्ल्ड कप, हॉकी एशियन चैंपियंस ट्रॉफी, एशियन यूथ एंड जूनियर वेट लिफ्टिंग चैंपियनशिप, ऐसे आयोजनों में आपके मंत्रालय और आपके विभागों की तैयारियों की परीक्षा होनी है। ठीक है, खिलाड़ी अपनी तैयारी कर रहे हैं, लेकिन अब स्पोर्ट्स टूर्नामेंट्स को लेकर हमारे मंत्रालयों को भी अलग अप्रोच से काम करना होगा।
Throwing light on the Chintan Shivir, Prime Minister underlined the need to discuss future goals and also review the previous conferences.
कोई भी चिंतन शिविर चिंतन से शुरू होता है, मनन के साथ आगे बढ़ता है और क्रियान्वयन पर पूरा होता है। यानी फर्स्ट कम्स रिफ्लेक्शन, देन रियलाइजेशन एंड देन इम्प्लीमेंटेशन एंड एक्शन। इसलिए इस चिंतन शिविर में आपको भविष्य के लक्ष्यों पर विमर्श तो करना ही है, साथ ही पहले की कॉन्फ्रेंस की भी समीक्षा करनी है।
More than 100 invitees from various states, union territories and the Ministry of Youth Affairs are attending the unique two-day Chintan Shivir and are putting forward their views and ideas on making the nations fitter and making India into one of the biggest sporting powers in the world. DD India.
Israel marked its Independence Day, though marred by protests. Up next, we get you a detailed report.
Israel kicked off annual Independence Day celebrations on Tuesday evening. Military jets and helicopters flew in formation over Israel on Wednesday as the country marked its 75th Independence Day.
Today is especially meaningful to me because 2 years ago we made Aliyah, our family, from America, and we wanted to be a part of the Jewish nation. So this is Israel Independence Day, and Israel is a place where we can thrive and express our true selves as Jews.
These celebrations for the 75th anniversary of Israel's 1948 independence took place this year while the country has been mired in weeks of unprecedented nationwide protests, primarily in response to a plan by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's nationalist religious coalition to overhaul the judiciary. As dignitaries and honored guests held the annual torch-lighting ceremony in Jerusalem, protesters gathered in Tel Aviv waving blue and white Israeli flags that have become a symbol of the weekly protests against the judicial overhaul plans, now entering the 16th week.
It could be like the very last Independence Day as we know it. And next year it might be completely different. There might be like different rules or restrictions. And I think when they try to change the country, no Independence Day is the same. You can't just go about your day as if it's the same. You have to make a stand, especially today.
First of all, I'm fighting for the bit of democracy that we do have here, which is still a very, very big lot that I do want to say. And I always want to remind people of the other.
The government and its supporters say the changes are needed to rein in activist judges who have intruded aggressively into the sphere of parliament and the executive, but agreed last month to pause the plan to allow for more consultation. For many Israelis, the standoff has opened up profound questions about their country that go beyond the makeup of the Supreme Court and the power of the executive to override its decisions. DD India.
Veteran freedom fighter, jurist and politician Mohammad Shahabuddin was sworn in as the 22nd President of Bangladesh on Monday in Dhaka. Parliament Speaker Shireen Sharmeen Chaudhary administered the oath of office at an impressive ceremony in the historic Darbar Hall of Banga Bhavan in the presence of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, Chief Justice Hassan Foez Siddiqui, cabinet members and other dignitaries. Sahabuddin family members, including his wife Dr. Rebecca Sultana and son, outgoing President Hamid's family members, attended the function. Cabinet Secretary Mohammad Mehboob Hussain conducted the program. From Asia, we now turn focus to America in our segment, America This Week. The U.S. presidential race for 2024 is becoming red hot. The incumbent in the White House has announced his bid to return to the seat of power in Washington. Joe Biden says he wants to protect democracy, keeping MAGA nuts at bay, and also finish his job. But there's a lot of chatter about whether he should still run at all, given his age and other issues, and that his predecessor Donald Trump is the frontrunner among the rival Republicans. A report ahead.
The United States presidential poll heats up. The week saw President Joe Biden filing his candidature for a second White House term in 2024. Biden filed documents on Tuesday. 80 years old, Biden made his announcement in a slickly produced video released by his new campaign team, in which he declares that it is his job to defend American democracy. It opens with imagery from the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol by supporters of former President Donald Trump. White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre said on Tuesday that if re-elected, President Joe Biden would serve for 8 years. Jean-Pierre tweeted this after declining to respond if the president intended to serve the full term if his 2024 run for the White House is successful. Joe Biden's predecessor, Donald Trump, is the front-runner in the Republican race. The 76-year-old ex-president is currently under much scrutiny as he faces allegations of rape, defamation, hush money scheme, having falsified business records, among others, and is entangled in a series of lawsuits. He made his presidential bid last November, but experts say that even though the combatants are the same, if Trump can win his party's 2024 nomination, voters shouldn't expect a retread of their earlier contest.
It'd be unprecedented in the sense that neither Gerald Ford nor Jimmy Carter nor George H.W. Bush ran for president after they had lost their first reelection bid. And so this would be the first time that it's happened in recent memory. The difference this time around would be that the burden would be on Trump to defend his record in 2020. The advantage, of course, that Biden has is that while he can't campaign against Trump now, he can campaign against Trump's previous presidency.
While Biden's approval rating is relatively low, his aides are confident he can beat Trump again. Apart from incumbent President Biden, Vivek Ramaswamy, Donald Trump, Nikki Haley are among others who wish to run in the 2024 race. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
The race to White House is intensifying in the U.S., with President Joe Biden announcing his bid to return to the White House. But concerns have mounted on his age, as around half of the Democrats say that President Joe Biden is too old to run again. Joe Biden, already the oldest president in U.S. history, would be 86 at the end of his second term.
The 2024 race for the White House could be uncharted territory in the United States, which celebrates youth, but where millions of Americans, including presidents, now keep working well beyond the traditional retirement. U.S. President Joe Biden gears up for a bruising re-election battle. Leader faces growing questions, even among Democrats, about whether his age will limit his ability to campaign and to handle the rigors of the White House in a potential second term.
He's going to be 82 when should he be reelected, and if he serves out the entirety of a second term, he'll be closer to 90 than he will be to 80. And this raises lots of concerns, justifiable concerns in my view, about his ability to fulfill all the obligations of the office, concerns about his health, his ability to actually finish out a second term, and what that means for the possibility of a President Harris stepping in. There are lots of concerns that are raised in that space. I think we're going to have two very old white men as the frontrunners in a country that's increasingly diverse and whose average age is less than half, right, than their ages. So, like, what to do here again? I think Kamala Harris could be an asset, a political asset potentially for Biden. At least, He's decades younger than Biden.
Some Texas voters are expressing concern over President Joe Biden's age following his re-election bid announcement.
He's too old. He needs to hang it up. He was too old before and he's way too old now. We need someone younger, but preferably a Republican.
Honestly, I think he's a little old for that because, I mean, he is 80 years old. I mean, you never know what's going to happen in the span of that time. So that's honestly my opinion about it.
Ronald Reagan was 77 when he left the White House, but President Joe Biden, who turns 80 on November 20, would be 86 by the time a second four-year term ends, should he win it. His leading potential Republican opponent, Donald Trump, would be 82 when he left office if he won in 2024. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
U.S. journalist Tucker Carlson, the host of Fox News' most popular show, abruptly left the network days after the TV channel paid a huge settlement to end a defamation case. Carlson was the best-known name on Fox News channel, hosting a primetime evening show that won fierce loyalty among the broadcaster's right-wing viewers. A week ago, Fox agreed to pay more than $700 million to settle a lawsuit with a company that manufactures voting machines over Fox's airing of false claims that the 2020 U.S. presidential election was rigged in favor of Joe Biden.
Fox News Media and its top-rated host, Tucker Carlson, have agreed to part ways less than a week after parent company Fox Corp settled for $787.5 million a defamation lawsuit in which Carlson played a starring role. The outspoken Carlson embraced conservative issues and delivered his views with a style that made his primetime show called Tucker Carlson Tonight the highest-rated cable news program in the key 25 to 54 age demographic on the most watched U.S. cable news network. Carlson's next move and the reason for his departure are unclear, but Fox News said in a statement that Fox News Media and Tucker Carlson have agreed to part ways. We thank him for his service to the network as a host and prior to that as a contributor. Carlson became Fox's most popular personality after replacing Bill O'Reilly in Fox's primetime lineup in 2016. He has also consistently drawn headline for controversial coverage, including most recently airing tapes from the 6th of January Capitol insurrection to minimize the impact of the deadly attack. Carlson joined Fox News as a contributor in 2009 and became a co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend in 2012. He began hosting his primetime show in November 2016. In 2021, Fox announced a multi-year deal with Carlson to provide content for its Fox Nation streaming service. DD India.
More than a dozen suspected gang members were stoned and burnt alive on Monday in Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince. The violence had started before dawn when gang members burst into several residential areas of the city, looting homes and attacking people.
Unrest in Haiti continues. The security situation has deteriorated further in recent months, with routine gunfights taking place between police officers and the gangs. Bloody turf battles have left hundreds dead and thousands displaced. Violence spilled onto the streets on Monday after locals lynched at least 10 suspected gang members in Port-au-Prince. According to police, the group of armed bandits had been traveling in a vehicle when they were lynched and later set alight.
We don't ask for a lot. The gang members have invaded the area. We want the police to go ahead and confront them. We are on our own. We have nothing. At about 2 in the morning, they invaded the area. We want the police to come and help us. Nothing more.
Gangs have grown in strength since the 2021 assassination of President Jovenel Moise, with residents caught in the middle as large portions of the capital and much of the countryside have become lawless. Criminal groups control about 80% of the metropolitan area, where some 200 gangs operate with impunity, according to estimates. Haiti's government and top United Nations officials have called for international force to support the police in their struggle against the gangs. DD India.
And now we get you Oceania this week. Amid the soaring interference of China in the South China Sea, Australia on Monday released its latest defense strategic review, wherein it emphasized the importance of expanding relationships and practical cooperation with the key allies, including India and Japan. The review report noted that New Delhi has a significant position, especially in the Indian Ocean region, and suggested Canberra strengthen cooperation with the world's largest populated nation.
A major defense review in Australia said that the country will speed up efforts to buy longer-range missiles to counter the growing threat from China. The report warned that the country can no longer be protected by its geographic isolation in the missile age. The government will spend some $19 billion to deliver the immediate recommendations. The 110-page report is described as the biggest overhaul of Australian defence since World War II.
This represents a document for today and tomorrow. It is the most significant work that's been done since the Second World War, looking in a comprehensive way at what is needed. It demonstrates that in a world where challenges to our national security are always evolving, we cannot fall back on old assumptions. We must build and strengthen our security by seeking to shape the future rather than waiting for the future to shape us.
The Australian Prime Minister said that this review report will help promote peace, stability and prosperity in the region and the world.
The recommendations of this review will underpin our work bolstering relationships with our international partners and promoting peace, stability and prosperity in our region and our world. At its core, all of this is making Australia more self-reliant, more prepared and more secure in the years ahead.
The Defence Strategic Review comes amid increasing military tension in the region over China's stance towards Taiwan, which it has repeatedly vowed to take by force if necessary. Chinese Navy has also established a major presence in the South China Sea, claiming parts of it as its own territory, contrary to international law. Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles said that review recommends that Australia's armed forces switch focus from land-based armour to longer-range strike capability, with munitions built in Australia. He added that this review and the government's response to it would reshape the Australian Army.
This review and the government's response to it does provide for a reshaping of the Australian Army, but in a way which gives it a much greater strike capability and a much longer range strike capability, but also a much greater ability to operate in a littoral environment. Ultimately, what the DSR recommends and what the government is going to put in place will give rise to an army with a much more focused mission, with a much more enhanced capability.
But China said that Australia was hyping up baseless Chinese threat theories and using them as an excuse to boost its military strength.
What I want to emphasize is that China has always pursued a defensive national defense policy. We are committed to maintaining peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific and the world, and we do not pose a threat to any country. We hope that some countries would stop using China as an excuse to boost its military and do not hype up baseless Chinese threat theories.
Australia will also fast-track plans to acquire the land-based high-mobility artillery rocket HIMARS system used by the Ukrainian army against Russian forces. DD India.
And our news from Africa in Africa this week. The leader of a Kenyan cult told his followers the world would end on April 15th and instructed them to starve themselves to be the first to go to heaven. 89 followers of the Good News International Church, which was based in Shakahola Forest in eastern Kenya, are known to have died. Authorities have recovered 81 bodies from shallow graves since Friday, while 8 cult members were found alive but later died. On Wednesday, dozens of people came to identify the remains of their relatives thought to have starved themselves to death in hope of going to heaven after joining the self-proclaimed Good News International Church led by Patrick McKinsey.
These are family members of the victims of the Kenyan hunger cult. On Wednesday, dozens of them were at a morgue in Malindi, identifying the remains of their loved ones. The morgue has been filling up rapidly since authorities started digging up human remains last week. Followers of the self-proclaimed Good News International Church are thought to have starved themselves to death in hopes of going to heaven. Stephen Mueti says he lost his wife and 5 children to the cult. He's among the many who have yet to identify their loved ones.
My children are dead. I know that for sure. The young men who told me about my children had been living in the forest since 2021. They told me the names of my children and they did not even know me. They told me my children had been starved to death.
Dozens of bodies have been found, and authorities say the death toll could rise further. The cult's leader, Paul Mackenzie, was arrested earlier this month following a tip-off. On Tuesday, Kenya's Interior Minister said at least 3 more people had been rescued alive.
Government of Kenya will do whatever it takes to make sure that we convict Mr. Mackenzie and all those who helped him perpetrate his heinous crimes.
And now we get you Sports Scan. Wimbledon has moved to ban Russian flags from this summer's tournament as officials continue to take a strong stance on the country after their invasion of Ukraine. While rules have been relaxed to allow Russian stars to compete as neutrals, organizers have updated their regulations to prohibit signs or symbols of support for either Russia or Belarus.
The All England club said that flags of Russia and Belarus will be banned from this year's Wimbledon Championships, while several players from the two countries have already signed personal declarations that will clear them to compete as neutrals. Wimbledon announced last month that it had lifted its ban, which prevented the athletes from the two countries playing the last year following Russia's attack on Ukraine. Wimbledon chief executive Sally Bolton said that grounds entry terms and conditions have been updated for this year's tournament.
So our grounds entry terms and conditions have been updated for this year, and that will prohibit any Russian or Belarusian flags being brought into the grounds, as well as any other symbols or signs of support for the war or the two regimes. So as I talked about earlier, our security arrangements are amended each year alongside a threat and risk assessment, if you like. And so the gate teams will be well briefed on what can and can't come into the grounds. So we would hope the latter point you make wouldn't happen, in the sense that a flag would be unfurled. But if it were, then our grounds entry terms and conditions are really clear.
Speaking at the club's pre-tournament spring media conference, club chairman Ian Havitt said that the U-turn had been the hardest decision for his 4-year in the job.
I now turn to the issue of Russian and Belarusian players. Our announcement on 31st March, made after careful and deep consideration, sets out the factors which informed our decision and why, taking all circumstances into account, we consider these to be the appropriate arrangements for Wimbledon this year. Arrangements being made with the full support of our UK government and the international stakeholder bodies of tennis. I can assure you it was a very difficult decision in exceptionally challenging circumstances. It does not lessen in any way whatsoever our total condemnation of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I will touch later upon ways in which we will continue to demonstrate our support for the people of Ukraine.
Wimbledon chiefs have revealed that special arrangements have been made for the tennis players from Ukraine in a boost ahead of the 2023 event.
Ticket offer to Ukrainian refugees who had resettled in our local boroughs of Merton and Wandsworth. We are pleased to share that we will donate to Ukrainian relief £1 for each ticket holder at the championships this year. This will result in a contribution of more than £500,000. We will also again invite 1,000 refugees to join us for a day at Wimbledon. Working with our Merton and Wandsworth councils and the British Red Cross, this offer would include tickets, transport, food and drink for the day. For Ukrainian players, the All England Club and the LTA will be funding the accommodation cost of 2 rooms for all main draw and qualifying players and their team members.
Wimbledon and other British grass court tournaments stood alone in barring Russian and Belarusian players such as former world number 1 Daniil Medvedev, Victoria Azarenka last year. The decision resulted in ranking points being stripped off from the events and the Lawn Tennis Association being hit with huge fines by the ATP and WTA. To compete this year, Russian and Belarusian players must agree to compete as neutrals, not to make statements supporting the war or the regimes involved, and not to receive funding from either nation and state-supported businesses. Wimbledon will meet all of the accommodation costs of Ukraine players during the tournament and all of the build-up events in the British grass court season, while £1 will be donated to Ukraine relief efforts for every ticket sold, amounting to around £5 lakh. Other announcements included a continuation of play on the Middle Sunday, which came into effect last year, and the extension of a trial allowing players to receive coaching from their groups in the stands. Sports Desk, DD India.
BCCI has announced a 15-man squad for the much-anticipated World Test Championship 2021-23 final. Rohit Sharma will lead the squad against Australia in the final, which will be played from June 7th to 11th at the Oval in London. More importantly, Ajinkya Rahane has made a comeback to the squad after a series of fine performances in domestic cricket and the ongoing IPL. All-rounder Shardul Thakur has also been picked.
The Board of Control for Cricket in India has announced a 15-man squad for the much-anticipated World Test Championship 2021-23 final. Rohit Sharma will lead the squad. The final between two sides is slated to be played from June 7 to June 11 at the Oval in London. Veteran batter Ajinkya Rahane has returned to the Indian side after 15 months. He last featured in the South Africa Test Series in January 2022. Rahane's form for Chennai in IPL, albeit in an entirely different format, is believed to be the biggest reason behind his comeback. The other major reason is the absence of middle-order batter Shreyas Iyer and wicket-keeper batter Rishabh Pant. Rahane scored 634 runs for Mumbai in Ranji Trophy 2022-23 cycle, hitting 2 centuries, including a double hundred in 7 matches. He has been in imperious form for Chennai Super Kings in IPL 2023, scoring at a strike rate of close to 200. Apart from Rahane, senior pro KL Rahul has also made it to the 15-man squad after being striped of vice-captaincy and a place in the squad in the final 2 tests of the Border Gavaskar Trophy against Australia. The spin-bowling all-rounders Ravindra Jadeja, Ravichandran Ashwin and Akshar Patel have held on to their places in the squad. It is, however, unlikely that the 3 of them will play together. In fact, if the conditions are favourable for seamers, then the management could opt for Shardul Thakur as the 4th pacer, which will mean only one among Ashwin, Jadeja or Akshar will play as a spinner. In the absence of Jasprit Bumrah, who is also ruled out because of a back injury, the onus of leading the pace attack will fall on Mohammad Shami and Mohammad Siraj. Battle for the 3rd seamer will be between veterans Jaydev Unadkat and Umesh Yadav. The Indian squad is like this: Rohit Sharma, captain; Shubman Gill, Chiteshwar Pujara, Virat Kohli, Ajinkya Rahane, KL Rahul, KS Bharat, Ravichandran Ashwin, Ravindra Jadeja, Akshar Patel, Shardul Thakur, Mohammad Shami, Mohammad Siraj, Umesh Yadav and Jaydev Unadkat. Earlier in the month, Australia also announced their squad for the World Test Championship final, bringing back the likes of Mitchell Marsh and retaining struggling Dave Warner. The Australian squad is like this: Pat Cummins, Scott Boland, Alex Carey, Cameron Green, Marcus Harris, Josh Hazelwood, Travis Head, Josh English, Usman Khwaja, Manesh Labuschagne, Nathan Lyon, Michelle Marsh, Todd Murphy, Matthew Renshaw, Steve Smith, Michelle Stark and David Warner. Earlier, Australia topped the WTC Championship table with 66.67%, while India ended second with 58.8% to make it to the summit clash. India qualified for the World Test Championship final for the 2nd time in the tournament's history, while Australia, who topped the table, reached their maiden final. Rohit Sharma's men sealed the berth after beating Australia 2-1 at home, setting up a blockbuster final against Pat Cummins' side. Sports Desk, DD India.
And now we take a look at the events apart from the news headlines, which in fact made it to the headlines.
Peruvian archaeologists have discovered a mummy believed to be over 1,000 years old, with some of its skin and hair still intact, and the body is believed to be that of an adolescent. The mummy was found at the archaeological complex of Cajamarquilla near Lima's outskirts. Archaeologists are still uncovering new finds at Cajamarquilla. From ceramic objects found near the body, archaeologists estimate the mummy is between 1,100 to 1,200 years old and could belong to the Lima or Ichma civilizations. A Thai conservationist, Wachiradol Pangpanya, is working tirelessly to conserve the red-headed vulture, also known as Asian king vulture. Though the bird plays a crucial role in the ecosystem as a scavenger, as it limits the spread of diseases by helping dispose of animal carcasses. Its population significantly declined due to hunting and modifications to its natural habitat. The chick that is being taken care by the Thai conservation hatched in March. It's the first to be bred in Asia and only the second in the world, and Wachiradol and his colleagues are doing everything possible to ensure it thrives. Ensuring the future of the species is no small feat, as Wachiradol now lives, eats and sleeps outside the vulture's nursery room in Nakhon Ratchasima Zoo in northern Thailand. He feeds it 4 times a day with different types of raw meat like that of rabbit, deer, chicken and rat to simulate its diet in the wild. After feeding, the chick does some sunbathing so it receives warmth and the vitamin D it needs for its physical and behavioral development. Toy maker Mattel has introduced its first Barbie with Down syndrome in a bid to make its famous doll range more inclusive. Mattel said it had worked with the National Down Syndrome Society in the United States to make the doll, which has a shorter frame and longer torso than its other Barbies. He added that the new doll's face is also a rounder shape and has almond-shaped eyes, smaller ears, and a flat nasal bridge. The doll is dressed in a puff-sleeved frock adorned with butterflies and flowers in yellow and blue colors associated with Down syndrome awareness. Hundreds of Venetians gathered in St. Mark's Square to form a giant rosebud to celebrate the festival of Boccolo. As part of the traditional festival, men in Venice give a blooming red rose called Boccolo by Venetians to their romantic interests to show their love. The tradition comes from the legendary unlucky love story between Maria Partecipazio, the daughter of Venetian nobleman Orso, and a composer Tancredi. 6 highly rare first edition collections of William Shakespeare's plays will go on show in London next week in what auction house Christie's says will be the largest display of the works in Britain. The exhibition, which marks the 400th anniversary of the publication of Shakespeare's first folio in 1623, runs in Christie's London showroom from May the 2nd until May 26th. The copies will then go back to their owners. The editions were compiled by Shakespeare's friends and published 7 years after his death. They contain 36 of the 37 plays he wrote, arranged for the first time as comedies, tragedies and histories. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
And now we leave you with images that stayed in news this week. Till we meet next, take good care of yourselves. Namaskar.
Namaskar, and thank you for joining us here on this special program. On the program tonight, we look at whether the predictions of a global recession were too hasty or based on incorrect parameters, because evidence suggests that the much talked about recession hasn't really happened. In fact, the global economy may be well past any continued slide or slump. However, many economy watchers, they continue to report that several economies are on the verge of collapse. The global economy crossed $100 trillion in 2022 and is growing despite analysts saying that it would contract in 2023. Countries are increasing their defense budgets, and this has also created investments. Also, in the recent past, the luxury goods conglomerate LVMH topped $500 billion in its market capitalization. We'll analyze whether the recession is real or magnified. And to do that with us, we have Dr. Charan Singh, eminent economist and CEO of eGrow Foundation, and Dr. Amit Kapoor is the chairman of the Institute of Competitiveness and a lecturer at the Center for East Asian Studies at Stanford University, California. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. Dr. Charan Singh, let me start with you. Through most of last year, analysts were predicting a global recession. That doesn't seem to have happened, or is it delayed? What do you say?
There are a couple of things that I would like to say. The World Economic Outlook is out, and they have done the chapter 1. There's a blog from the chief economist of the International Monetary Fund. They've all been talking about it. Almost a year, everybody has been talking about the recession that is going to set in very fast. And one of the reasons that everybody said the recession is going to set in was mainly because the knee-jerk reaction of the advanced countries, because of the very high inflation that was up there in those countries. Let me illustrate. On an average, a 30-year average of inflation would be around 2% in America, and it has touched nearly 10%. Similar is the story in the euro area as in the UK also. So there's no doubt that the interest rates were raised very aggressively because inflation was very, very high. But then there is also, I do not know if a 30-year average is a good way to look at it, because after how many years, after the Great Depression, there's a war in Europe. It's a very unique situation. Now, because the interest rates were rising that rapidly, obviously a slowdown was expected in the economies of the world. And because since COVID, there had been severe crisis, global value chains had been disrupted very, very badly. And then there was a trigger point of Russia-Ukraine war. It was expected that this aggressive interest rate hike that is taking place is going to take the world into a recessionary phase. However, many things happened since then. The American economy turned out to be more resilient, Europeans more resilient, even the Russians, where the sanctions were done, turned out to be more resilient. And why were they so resilient? I think a couple of things was number of policy issues that were initiated, concerns that were expected. Because of that, these economies turned out to be more resilient, and therefore the fear of recession now is certainly receding.
Sure. Dr. Amit Kapoor, you know, when the economy was coming out of COVID, it was driven by pent-up demand. Now, globally, there is a case of pent-up demand. Could one say that? If it's fueled by earnings from petrodollars, high energy prices, and or is that really, I mean, a bit of a myopic view? I mean, with only a few people really benefiting.
No, I think when you say that it is about petrodollars or there is a pent-up demand, if you were talking to me about 2 years back, I would have agreed, yes, there is a pent-up demand, there is vengeance spending that is possibly happening. But if you really look at how things have really fructified in the last few years, or especially over the last 12 to 18 months, it is very clear that the economy is not into a recessionary phase. We were actually trying to be very, very cautious. In fact, if you really look at how US was reacting to the whole situation, they were being fairly cautious in terms of how they wanted to have their monetary policy. It was fairly hawkish. But again, if you really look at it, like in terms of say, is it just giving benefit to just a few set of people? I don't think so, because there is a very clear evidence that job recovery has started happening. If you really look at the latest figures from India as well, there is a certain job recovery. We have lesser levels of unemployment vis-a-vis over the last quarter itself. So if you really look at the PLFS data, the quarterly data, it clearly shows that we have had a drop in unemployment. So what it means is that there is a certain level of employment that is getting generated. The industry is coming back. People have the money to spend. And yes, of course, there was a lot of money that was possibly in the coffers of people that they were saving. Additionally, if you really look at this, one thing which is very, very clear is that there were some signs at about 6 months back that yes, we could actually get into a recession. So that cautious approach did come in because there were those technology companies in the US who were really trying to sack a lot of people or lay off a lot of people. But that was not something which was hugely sustained. It was also driven by something which was because there was a lot of hiring that happened during COVID. So there were a lot of people on the bench. There were a lot of excessive hiring that had happened. So it was also some kind of a what I call correction in terms of or correction that was happening in the enterprises. And we possibly looked at it that there is a recessionary fear that is actually going to happen.
Okay, so it may have been a misinterpretation to some extent. But Dr. Charan Singh, you know, LVMH, which is the French luxury goods conglomerate, and they own brands like Louis Vuitton and Givenchy, etc. They have, it's become the first company in the luxury goods market to have crossed $500 billion in valuation. And their chairman, in fact, Bernard Arnault, is the richest man in the world. That doesn't happen during a recession, does it? I mean, luxury goods in high demand?
Absolutely. This is very interesting. Why do you go that far? Look in India. Look in India also, you will find that the sale of luxury cars has been going up. The Audis and the Mercedes, they're all going up. So the point that which was being made earlier, and I totally endorse that point, during COVID time, there was a fiscal stimulus which was happening. Now, in India, many of us had been saying that you can give fiscal stimulus, keep paying people the money, but where are they going to spend on? There's nowhere to spend on. Basically, people are locked in, and what they need is good food, health facility. But if you keep putting in money in their hands, they're obviously going to save, and that's exactly how you summed it up as pent-up demand. So it was anticipated that as COVID years would pass by, and as the economies would recover, there's going to be a bounce back. People do have the purchasing power. You have seen the very good example in our own countries, the stock market index, always going up and never looking down. And the people did have the purchasing power, and that purchasing power had to reflect somewhere or the other. But I tell you, the most important thing that you have brought out in today's discussion is, was it an error of judgment, or was it, what was it? When the 2000 Lehman Brothers happened in 2008, the Queen of England asked that question to the economist in Bank of England. What happened? You have such sophisticated models, and you've been saying you mastered the art of inflation and that you're on top of the economy. None of you could see this coming. And such a great Lehman Brothers recession that the whole world is sinking now, they didn't. So my view is that the macroeconomists at the Fed and at the IMF and the World Bank need to rethink their theories. And well, they don't have to go too far. During the COVID time, the liquidity pumping that happened, and during the Lehman Brothers, and since then, you see the balance sheet of the Fed Reserve went from 1 to 8. Now, somewhere inflation had to happen. And as the trigger Russia-Ukraine war happened, war in Europe, first after the world wars, this was bound to happen, that eruption will take place and a volcanic thing will happen. And that's exactly what happened. Did that deserve a knee-jerk reaction of the interest rate hike that happened? One thing. Secondly, I think a very important message which we are missing, but the world has to learn, the sanctions. When India did the Pokhran, Vajpayee was the Prime Minister, sanctions were done against India, we survived it, and we never looked back since then. This time again, the sanctions were done on Russia. Russia survived it. And rather, when the world was thinking Russian economy will be crushed, it didn't. Rather, now IMF is saying that the Russian economy, very sophisticated, were resilient.
Okay. We seem to have a problem with the connection, but we'll hopefully get back with Dr. Charan Singh. Dr. Amit Kapoor, is it possible to have a recession without any drastic increase in unemployment? Because you were saying that there have been layoffs, but unemployment is at a 50-year low in the US. So this is according to Justin Wolfers, an economist of the University of Michigan. I mean, is this a paradox or something? Because, you know, many people actually do still believe that there is a mild recession taking place.
So that's a very interesting question in terms of like whether recession will always see huge levels of unemployment or whatever. In fact, if you really get into a very deep recession when demand is actually going to just crash, of course, things would actually see huge levels of unemployment. You saw that during the Depression era and so on and so forth. That was possibly the worst recession that the world saw. In fact, as Dr. Singh was saying, that there was this 2008 crisis. We did see levels of unemployment rising quite significantly. I really don't suspect that you will actually see huge levels of what I call employment or employment gains or whatever during the times of recession. You might actually just sustain for a period of time, but you will eventually have to really, let people go because the companies will not have the wherewithal to either sustain that kind of manpower or there is absolutely no need for doing it. So I think what was happening is that across the board, if you really look at the kind of stances that people were taking, it was clearly driven by a situation wherein everybody was getting overtly paranoid. The enterprises were thinking, well, let's maintain whatever is there, we will not fire or whatever. There were those sets of issues that were actually emerging. So the paranoia was at a very, very high level. So, you know, like it was a very clear reflection of what you call as individual rationality leading to collective irrationality. Okay. So there was this whole collective view across the world which was emerging that we are getting into a crisis of sorts which is going to be unmanageable. We have not seen anything of that sorts. In fact, we also missed a point that when the last pandemic had happened, the world saw possibly one of the finest growth phases. In fact, whenever a pandemic happens, the economies will typically grow with a vengeance or will grow fairly fast. So I think there was that element we were not really thinking of. If you really look at it, what you call as the roaring 20s were exactly a reflection of post the pandemic. And we were always thinking that there is a roaring 20s again, which are definitely possible. And we are moving into that direction. I think the world is now clearly pegged to grow. It is not really going to get into a huge recessionary phase. Of course, there are going to be one or two skirmishes here and there. You have the Ukraine war, you have the oil prices, which can actually cause some kind of concern, but they're not something which are going to take the world to a severe recessionary phase. In fact, a lot of people were expecting that we are going to have a huge dip in demand once the oil prices were rising. If you really look at it, the world has taken it in a stride with the recent oil price hikes. So it is not really getting to a situation wherein we are getting it out there.
So it's a growth phase that we are in. Dr. Charan Singh, according to Yuval Hariri, in his famous book called Sapiens, he says that he wrote about the economy also there, and he says that the economy, banking, loans, consumption, etc., is based on what he calls a trust in the future. Everyone has this trust that the future is going to be great. That's why everything functions. But now forecasts obviously matter, and people, when they start forecasting about recession, they seem to have missed something. And in this particular case, in hindsight, we are all saying, okay, this is economic resilience of Germany or economic resilience of Italy. What do you think? I mean, what have we actually missed if we have to go down to, I mean, what was resilient about these economies?
So one thing which is very clear is, yes, the trust is most important. And even in the current World Economic Outlook, which has been released in April now, just recently, the growth projections for the next 5 years at 3% are amongst the lowest in the last, I think, 30 years. So therefore, certainly trust matters. And these sort of statements coming from the IMF or the World Bank or Asian Development Bank that a recession is setting in, these are really worrisome. But then what has happened is, please remember that the inflationary correction that has taken place but has not brought down inflation back to 2%. Inflation is still in the range of 4 to 5% in the advanced countries and will continue to be in that range till 2024. Now, a year has passed by. Russia-Ukraine war has taken place. Russia and Ukraine contribute in certain fertilizers, metals, wheat and food items. And you remember that the food cycle generally is 1 year. And therefore, there has been a correction in the economy itself. The oil prices, which were just being discussed, they are down now and they are at a stable level. So all these corrections that took place in addition to the fiscal measures that and to some extent the economies have survived. But the point that is most important is that had the liquidity management, since Lehman Brothers been more responsible, more accountable, and more moderate, this sort of a situation would not have precipitated.
Okay.
Similarly, if you recollect, when India did its stimulus during COVID time, very measured, totally targeted, and in a very focused manner, we were being ridiculed by the rest of the world that our stimulus during COVID is inadequate.
Okay.
Whereas the rest of the world was spilling over and doing very liberal stimulus that also should have been moderated at that point of time. The effect of high inflation is a consequence of those policies starting from Lehman Brothers, which were not very responsible and accountable, and as I said, resulted in a spurt, a volcanic spurt that was triggered by the Russia-Ukraine war.
Dr. Amit Kapoor, can we term, the drive among the millennial generation as being a factor also for avoiding recession? You did say that we are in a growth phase. Some would say that the developing countries are going to be driving growth for the future, and they'll catch up with the advanced countries over time. But, we are in an age where there are lots of new opportunities. There's the merging of AI with internet-based activities. And that's where most of the action is currently. So, do you see this as one of the factors that we are in a digital world that is driving growth?
Oh, so I think I'll not say only digital, what I call world, which is driving growth. We have to fundamentally understand as to how the young people think. I think if you really look at my previous generation, which is like my father's generation or whatever, they were clearly driven by a lot of savings as a behavior. In fact, my present generation actually went into a little more spending and things. But if you really look at my kids' generation, they spend far more. In fact, they are really willing to spend because they know or they are fairly confident of themselves that they will be earning over a period of time. They would like to spend, they would like to enjoy, they would like to go out. So if you really look at it, the younger generation is far more what I call risk-taking, or per se, if you really ask me. And that actually drives a lot of consumption. So if you really look at the consumption as of today, I think the younger generation, one, is driving the consumption. There is also a huge thing that the younger generation has started making better amounts of money than what we were doing in the past. In fact, today, if you really talk to me, in fact, my son's salary is possibly equal to the salary that I'm making today. So, and that is his first year of job. But if those are the kind of drivers that are happening, there's a very interesting change and shift that is possibly happening in the world across the board. The younger generation will always drive the consumption. If you really look at within India itself, we are talking about a set of people who are going to be consuming close to about 30 crore young people who are willing to actually consume possibly digital content, which is actually driving a lot of things. They want to be on the street. When I say be on the street in terms of go around and look at places, they want to try different set of things. In fact, if you talk about AI is a very one niche bit of it, but look at the way things are happening in art. Look at the way things are happening in music. There is a huge, what I call, consumption of content that is also being driven. Today, new age kids, the kind of gig work they are doing, whether you really talk about creating music, independent music folks or whatever, that is also creating a lot of monetary opportunities or employment opportunities or gainful employment. And I think I'm fairly happy to see those kind of things. In fact, what we are seeing in India is the rise of a certain creative class. Okay. And when I say creative class, that means like people who are trying to do different set of things. In fact, about 5 years back, or even 20 years back, sorry, for that matter, we would have actually been averse to the idea that somebody would actually become an artist or a singer or whatever. But today, look at the opportunities, and that is where the consumption is. Look at the stand-up comedians that are there. What I'm saying is the world is different. The whole economic structure has moved ahead than what we were really thinking of in the past.
Absolutely. Dr. Charan Singh, then, in hindsight, can we say that hawkish monetary policy of the US Fed, it was supposed to create this recession. It actually worked in not doing so. There's an economist who says that, I quoted him a little earlier, Justin Wolfers from the University of Michigan, who says that a soft landing has already happened in the US. What are your views?
I totally agree with you. In hindsight, one can easily say the aggressiveness with which the interest rates were raised were really not needed. One should have looked at what the interest rates do, as theory would tell, handles the demand side, does not look at the disruptive global value chains. And we all knew that the inflationary pressures are coming. Firstly, as I mentioned, from the balance sheet of these advanced countries since Lehman Brothers. Secondly, because the trigger was the COVID supply side disruptions. And the third, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war, first in so many years in Europe itself. Now, those were the reasons, and there were supply disruptions on agriculture products and metal that were being supplied by these two countries. The policy prescription should have been different. It should have been more on the fiscal policy side rather than the interest rate side. So I totally agree with that statement of yours that the monetary policy should have been far more moderate and comfortable in doing that. Now, looking ahead, I think the inflation is yet not fully recovered. Continue in the advanced countries and will continue to be so till the end of 2024. Therefore, I think the advanced countries will have to take help more of the fiscal side, less of the monetary policy side, knowing very well there are these pressure points from which inflation is coming. I also would like to make a point. The world is far flatter now. One country putting sanctions on the other has reasonably well demonstrated doesn't work. So what is then left? I think what is left is a fiscal and a monetary policy which is globally more compatible through discussion and not one which hurts one against the other. That's very, very important now. In that, the IMF and the World Bank will have to play a very prominent role, and say the fiscal policies across the world, the monetary policies across the world will have to be more balanced, accountable to each other. And therefore, the interest rate hikes, the tax instrument have to be very carefully modulated. The tone has been set by the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, when she did the company taxation. And she said if we go for competitive company taxation, which is a fiscal policy instrument, then one country hurts the other. And therefore, universally across the world, it was decided.
So you're suggesting that there should be more alignment internationally with all these policies. Dr. Amit Kapoor, Raghuram Rajan believes that companies are actually holding off, laying off people because these workers have specific skill sets and they are scarce, and they are just holding them on because, that's rather, it may not be wise to throw them out. And he considers this risky because he actually believes that there's a recession. I mean, from the research material that I was reading. So how would you view this? Because he says that, I mean, the companies are actually holding on to people that they can't actually afford to keep.
I don't agree with that analysis, and I'll give you the reason for that. It's very simple. Like, whenever you talk about running a business, I think the first thing is that you have to manage your costs. And if the recession is there, then that means my bottom line is actually going to start hit fairly badly. The bottom lines are not getting hit. We are not seeing that they are actually getting, people are getting laid off or whatever. You might maintain them for a while. There could be lesser work or whatever, if I might even agree for a bit. But the question is, in the long term, the enterprises are seeing a positive shift, or they are seeing that there is going to be an uptick that is going to happen. Because enterprises will always take a view which is protecting their interests or protecting their shareholders' interests and so on and so forth. So they are going to be protecting that interest. If you really look at the Indian context itself, like if you really look at this Akshay Tritiya itself, look at the kind of sales that the gold market has actually seen. Is that a reflection of a recession, or whether we are really saying things are really moving forward?
Indeed. Dr. Charan Singh, we are running short of time, so briefly, I mean, I just want to go through two more questions. This question is to you. People are spending quite a lot across the world, in the US and other parts of the world. Consumption appetite is very good. Is that a sign then that the economy has recovered from the shocks, actually, of 2022? And it was not a recession, that 2020. This was just like a shock, an external shock that was caused, and it's just a bump in the road, not a recession at all. And that's why the economy has recovered, basically.
I would totally agree with that statement for a very simple reason that Russia-Ukraine war was an accident. And please remember, the share of the world GDP of both these countries put together is less than 1%. So therefore, I would not really think that it was really recessionary. I think the knee-jerk reaction rather was far more recessionary, and the sacrifice ratio that knee-jerk reaction has caused is far severe than what would have been happening if just the Russia-Ukraine war was there and sanctions had not been imposed.
A final question to you, Dr. Amit Kapoor. India has remained the bright spot. China has revived. So to what extent is Asia driving economic recovery and growth going forward?
I just couldn't get the last word that you said.
I said that to what extent is Asia driving economic recovery and growth going forward?
Oh, I think if you really look at it, like it's a very clear-cut view across the world that Asia is going to be driving the economic growth and recovery across the world. Look at the kind of number of people that live here. Look at the kind of consumption class that we are talking about. India and China put together are close to about 3 billion people or 2.8 billion people. That's a huge market itself. And if you really look at it, like with the kind of growth that these countries are seeing, let's assume for a moment that China is not continuing to grow at the rate that it was growing in the past. There is a certain slowdown that is there, but India will grow. If you really look at the kind of growth rates that we are talking about, you're talking about per capita incomes nearly doubling over the next 5 years. If the per capita income is going to double over the next 5 years, that means there is going to be a huge consumption. We are going to be driving what you would call as the growth thing. In fact, a very simple way, in fact, we really do something called as the momentum index. If you really ask me, there are going to be 3 locations in the world which are going to drive the momentum across the world: US, India, and China. And that is very, very clear in our understanding.
We leave it there. Thank you very much, Dr. Amit Kapoor, Chairman, Institute of Competitiveness, Lecturer, Center for East Asian Studies, Stanford University, and Dr. Charan Singh, eminent economist and CEO of eGrow Foundation. Thank you for enlightening us on this interesting subject. And in conclusion, let's just say this, that in October last year, some analysts had predicted that more than a third of the world's economies would teeter on the brink of collapse in 2023. While GDP growth has, in fact, slowed, the GDP has not contracted. Developing countries are catching up with the wealthier ones, and this is a trend that is driving growth going forward. Thanks very much for watching. Namaskar.
G20 नए विचारों की परिकल्पना के लिए और सामूहिक एक्शन को गति देने के लिए एक ग्लोबल प्राइम मूवर की तरह काम करें। वैश्विक विकास महिलाओं की भागीदारी के बिना संभव नहीं है। भारत की G20 अध्यक्षता की थीम वन अर्थ, वन फैमिली, वन फ्यूचर में पूर्ण रूप से समाहित है।
Why do you think this honor that you and a select few others have got this year, the highest that the Indian government can give to Indians living abroad, what do you think it would mean to the larger Indian diaspora worldwide?
India is a great country. India has a big talent. We have to commit ourselves. If we commit, we can achieve what our Prime Minister is talking, what we are thinking ourselves, and we have to decide to bring India at the forefront of the world, not only in telecommunications, every technology, every area of science, economics, and so on. Country should grow. This should be our commitment. This should be my message. Of course, originally I am an Indian, 100% Indian, but at the same time, legally I am having Dutch passport.
Good morning. This is DD India and you're watching News on the Hour. I'm Tanvi Taneja. A wave of Russian missile attacks hit several cities across Ukraine early on Friday. Now, Kiev says it's planning a counter-offensive. In news from Sudan, paramilitary rapid support forces have shot a Turkish evacuation plane last morning as it was landing, damaging its fuel system. The Turkish Defense Ministry confirmed that the plane had been fired at, but said there were no injuries. So this is just one instance of an extended ceasefire that is not holding. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, during a visit to New York on Friday, has said that he was worried about the future of American democracy. And Sri Lanka's parliament on Friday approved the much-needed $3 billion IMF bailout package. We'll tell you all about it and much more news over the next 1 hour. Let's get started with the headlines. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky alongside Slovak and Czech leaders honor victims of Russian strikes. Russia hurled missiles at cities across Ukraine as people slept early on Friday, killing at least 26 civilians in its first large-scale airstrikes in nearly 2 months. Operation Kaveri continues as nearly 2,400 Indians have been evacuated. INS Sumedha departed from Port Sudan with 300 passengers on board for Jeddah. 13th batch of Indians also evacuated under the operation. North Korea's Kim Yo-jong, sister of leader Kim Jong-un, says a US-South Korea agreement this week about the need to shore up South Korean security will worsen the situation, according to state media KCNA. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar addresses India-Dominican Republic business event in Santo Domingo, highlights India's increased interest in Latin America, reflected in enhanced political contacts and growing trade and increased investments in energy, pharmaceuticals, agriculture, mining and IT. US regulators vow to sharpen oversight as Silicon Valley Bank's signature bank aftershocks reverberate. US Federal Reserve admits to own failure in identifying startup bank troubles. And in sports, in IPL action, Kolkata Knight Riders scheduled to compete against the Gujarat Titans at the Eden Gardens in Kolkata, while Delhi Capitals will compete against Sunrisers Hyderabad at the Arun Jaitley Stadium in New Delhi. You're watching News on the Hour. Welcome once again. Let's start the bulletin with updates from the Russia-Ukraine war first. Russian strikes battered cities across Ukraine on Friday, killing 26 people, including 5 children, as Kiev said preparations for a counter-offensive against Moscow's forces were nearly complete. The deadly new attacks included a strike on a residential block in the historic city of Uman in central Ukraine. The barrage of almost 24 missiles overnight ended a weeks-long pause following the repeated Russian strikes that had aimed to paralyze Ukraine's energy grid during the winter months. On Friday evening, workers in Uman, the site of an annual Hasidic pilgrimage, pulled the body of another child from under the rubble. Authorities said that Russian cruise missiles killed 23 people, including 4 children in Uman. Rescuers were using cranes to search for survivors among the remains of the multi-story housing block in the central city of 80,000 inhabitants. Russian missiles also hit the central city of Dnipro, already grief-stricken after a January strike on a tower block that killed more than 40 people. Separately, authorities in the southern region of Kherson said on Friday evening that Russian forces shelled the village of Belozerka, killing a 57-year-old woman and wounding another 3. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the latest barrage and vowed a response. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has sent condolences meanwhile to the family of a mother and daughter killed in Russian strikes in Dnipro. The regional governor said that a missile killed a 2-year-old child and a 31-year-old woman in the southeastern city of Dnipro.
As a result of today's missile strike in the Dnipropetrovsk region, 2 Ukrainians died, a mother and her daughter, Ola, born in 1992, and Veryonika, born in 2020, who hadn't lived old enough to be 3. Eternal remembrance and condolences to the family. Condolences to their close friends. Today our Air Force managed to shoot down most of the Russian missiles, 21 out of 23 fired.
Further, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, alongside Slovak and Czech leaders, honored victims of Russian strikes on Friday. Zelensky said Russia launched more than 20 missiles and air defense forces managed to shoot down most of them, but unfortunately there were impacts. He added that Russia must lose in this war and its leadership must be punished for the crime of aggression and genocide against Ukrainians, so that other nations will not have to face what Russian terror did to Ukrainians. During a joint news briefing with Slovakia's President Zuzana Kaputova and Czech President Peter Pavel, Zelensky asked to honor the memory of the victims with a minute of silence. A United Nations committee said it was deeply concerned about human rights violations by Russian forces and private military companies in Ukraine, including enforced disappearances, torture, rape and extrajudicial executions. In its findings on Russia, the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination called on Russian authorities to investigate allegations of human rights violations committed during the invasion of Ukraine. In its report, the committee listed excessive use of force, arbitrary detentions, killings, and the forcible transfer of children from Ukraine to Russia among the violations committed.
The committee was deeply concerned about the grave human rights violations committed during the ongoing armed conflict by the Russian Federation's military forces and private military companies against those protected under the convention. It was also severely disturbed by reports of incidents, by reports of incitement to racial hatred and propagandation, of racist stereotypes against ethnic Ukrainians, and by the alleged forced mobilization and conscription, which disproportionately affect ethnic minorities, including indigenous peoples.
Ukrainian territorial defense forces held military drills in the Rivne region on Friday with gunfire shots and smoke from grenades. Servicemen were performing tactical elements of the drills. Members of separate territorial defense brigade said one of the most difficult things was to practice in the smoke. Commander of the Joint Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Serhiy Naiv, said that they practiced several things and gained psychological stability and training to demonstrate it in a real battle scenario. Other members said that it was good to have such training before the real fighting. In a related development, the foreign ministers of Iran, Russia, Syria and Turkey may hold a meeting in May in Moscow. The Turkish foreign minister has said that the meeting could be held as a part of efforts to rebuild Turkey-Syria ties after years of animosity during Syria's civil war. NATO member Turkey has backed political and armed opposition to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad during the 12-year civil war and sent its own troops into the country's north. Turkey has also managed to maintain cordial relations with Putin despite the war in Ukraine. Last year, Ankara helped to broker, along with the United Nations, a deal that allowed the resumption of Ukrainian grain exports from Black Sea ports. Shifting focus to Sudan now, Operation Kaveri of the Government of India, launched with the aim of repatriating Indian citizens who have been stranded in the conflict-hit zones, continues. An aircraft carrying 231 Indians from Jeddah reached New Delhi today. With this, the 5th outbound flight, Around 1,600 Indians have been evacuated so far. People express their gratitude to the Indian government for their safe return from Sudan. So, in news coming from the conflict zones in Sudan, the Sudanese army said that the paramilitary rapid support forces had shot at a Turkish evacuation plane on Friday morning as it was landing, damaging its fuel system. The Turkish Defense Ministry confirmed that the plane had been fired at, but said that there were no injuries. This is just one instance of an extended ceasefire that is not holding. The US has deployed some of its intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance assets in the region. While the countries are evacuating their citizens caught in the crossfire, spare a thought for the Sudanese citizens who are fleeing to neighboring countries. More in this report.
Strikes from the air, tanks and artillery shook Sudan's capital, Khartoum, on Friday. Heavy bombardment pounded the adjacent city of Bari. This, even though the army and RSF, the warring factions, agreed to extend a truce by 72 hours. Hundreds have been killed and tens of thousands have fled for their lives in a power struggle between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces that erupted on April 15 and has since disabled an internationally backed transition to democracy. Residents in capital Khartoum are facing uncertainty. The city has been hit by prolonged water and electricity outages. Many are struggling to obtain daily necessities. Banking services are down and food prices up.
From my residence, it's hot weather and there is no electricity. As you can see, I'm in the street. And there is no electricity for 7 hours. They cut it from the early morning and there is no water for 2 days now. No, we don't have water. And the problem is the evacuate for people is going perfectly for foreigners. And there's a lot of Sudanese migrate from Sudan to other neighboring countries, Egypt and Ethiopia, and going to their destinations.
At least 512 people, both civilians and military members, have been killed and nearly 4,200 left injured. South Sudanese President Salva Kiir is in contact with both of Sudan's rival military leaders in a bid to extend the truce period and bring an end to the fierce clashes which erupted between the two sides in mid-April. An official on Thursday said,
"We are calling upon the fighting parties or fighting groups to cease hostilities and sit down for ceasefire and sit on the table to negotiate. Because this war will not be finished on the ground, but it will be finished at the end on the table. So we are calling upon them to listen to the international community and to the region so that they sit and talk."
Tens of thousands have fled for their lives in this internal power struggle that had erupted on April 15. Thousands have been evacuated under difficult circumstances. The U.S. is strengthening support through the U.S. Africa Command.
We have deployed U.S. intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets to support air and land evacuation routes, which Americans are using. And we are moving naval assets within the region to be pre-positioned to provide any necessary support along the coast. U.S. Africa Command has established a deconfliction cell to facilitate coordination with our allies and partners in this effort.
Atmosphere for him to be lynched and killed. And 67 years after.
And any option entails a degree of risk. But because the situation is unlikely to improve, we encourage Americans who want to leave to take advantage of the options that are available to them in the next 24 to 48 hours.
In a stark reminder of the fragility of the ceasefire, Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces, the RSF, shot at a Turkish evacuation plane as it was landing at the Wadi Sayyidina airport outside Khartoum on Friday, damaging its fuel system. In persisting ceasefire violations that the United States has called worrying, heavy gunfire and detonations rattled residential neighborhoods of Khartoum, where fighting has been concentrated over the past week. DD India.
U.S. State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel has said that several hundred American citizens have already departed Sudan by either land, sea or air routes. Fewer than 5,000 people have requested additional information from the State Department, and only a fraction of those are Americans who have repeatedly sought Washington's assistance to leave the country. The Pentagon later said only a relatively small number of Americans are seeking to leave Sudan at the moment, and international flights are still departing the country.
100 U.S. citizens have already departed Sudan, either by land, sea, or aircraft. I'm not going to be prescriptive of how much of those we've been in direct communication with, but throughout our communications with American citizens, we are connecting them with avenues for departure of the country. Alex, let me take a little bit of a step back. I think first and foremost, as it relates to Evan's case, we, of course, were deeply disappointed that the request to visit Evan in early May, on May 11th, for a consular visit was denied.
Around 180 Palestinians, including families and students, were welcomed by their families and relatives at Rafah crossing with Egypt on Friday. While the Gaza Strip has gone through numerous wars between Israel and Palestinian factions and suffered its own bout of civil conflict in 2007, Jauda expressed shock at the firepower unleashed by Sudanese rivals against each other since April the 15th. We're heading for a short break in the bulletin. More international news continue on the other side. Keep watching DD India.
Namaste land.
Marhaban ila al-Hind.
Zari India.
Salam India. Namaste India.
Namaskar Bharata.
Мы
Индия.
نحن هنود India. ما हिंदी हस्ती हिंदियान
Salam Hindustan.
We are India.
Your window to rising India. India's voice on global platforms. Latest news from India and around the world. In-depth analysis of global headlines. Watch DD India in your country. Available for downlink in Central Asian countries. STTV broadcast is available through the satellite GSAT 17 at 93.5 degrees east. HDTV broadcast is available through the satellite GSAT 10 at 83 degrees east. For technical details, scan here. Switch to DD India now. As the day unfolds and news and events take shape, we get you complete coverage of every news leaking in, tracking new developments as they happen. Midday Prime English, Monday to Friday, 2 p.m. on DD India.
Welcome back to News on the Hour. Moving on now in the bulletin, on his last leg of his visit to Latin America, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar called on the President of Dominican Republic, Luis Abinader. The External Affairs Minister conveyed greetings of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the President. Both the leaders discussed the increasing political contacts, growing economic and commercial relations, business cooperation, capacity building, and people-to-people ties, among other things. Dr. Jaishankar also held discussions with the Foreign Minister of Dominican Republic, Roberto Alvarez. Both leaders discussed the growing bilateral ties and shared perspectives on neighborhoods, outlook on global developments, and cooperation in the United Nations. They agreed that the beautiful friendship between both the countries will prosper more with the enhanced exchanges. The External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, addressed the India-Dominican Republic business event in Santo Domingo coinciding with the first ever visit to the Caribbean nation by an Indian foreign minister. Dr. S. Jaishankar, who arrived in Santo Domingo from Colombia on a Latin American tour that took him earlier to Guyana and Panama, began his remarks at the gathering by highlighting the economic dynamism of India, which is forecast to enjoy a growth of 6.1% this year. The External Affairs Minister said that the trade turnover between the two countries has now reached almost $1 billion. The External Affairs Minister also noted that there are a few Indian companies like Glenmark Pharmaceuticals, Hetero, Kaplan Point and Flagship Biotech that have already established offices in the Dominican Republic.
There's a conscious intensification of our relationship with Latin America, and I would say that in many ways business is leading the way. So this is very much therefore a diplomatic trip, it is a political trip, but it is of course a business trip. Where the Dominican Republic is concerned, from a trade which we had of $12 million before we established diplomatic relations 20 years ago, it has today reached almost $1 billion. Quite a few Indian companies have already established offices here. I see among them is Glenmark Pharmaceuticals, Hetero, Kaplan Point and Flagship Biotech. And a lot of our big automobile dealers, two-wheeler dealers like Bajaj, Hero and Royal Enfield have actually local dealers. I also am told that we have started sourcing small cars from India.
External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar Raquel Pena inaugurated the Embassy of India in the Dominican Republic. Later in a tweet, the EAM said, and I quote him, "Our political relations are exceptionally cordial and we coordinate closely in the multilateral arena. Confident that the presence of our resident mission will mark a new phase of cooperation and help strengthen our ties in bilateral, regional and global domains." Unquote. And now shifting focus to the Korean Peninsula. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's powerful sister Kim Yo-jong has warned that a US-South Korean agreement aimed at strengthening deterrence against Pyongyang would only lead to more serious danger. This is what the state media reported today. The United States and South Korea vowed on Wednesday that North Korea would face a nuclear response and the end of leadership there should it use its own arsenal, as the two countries' presidents met in Washington. In response, Kim Yo-jong said that the North was convinced that a nuclear deterrent should be brought to further perfection. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and US counterpart Joe Biden issued what was titled the Washington Declaration, bolstering the US nuclear umbrella over South Korea, which is increasingly nervous about Pyongyang's aggression. Kim Yo-jong said that the agreement, however, would only result in making peace and security of Northeast Asia and the world be exposed to more serious danger, and the fact that it is an act that can thus never be welcome. So, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has said that it was necessary to ensure Russia's invasion of Ukraine does not succeed, and that Seoul was considering its options when it came to sending lethal aid to Kiev. In a speech at Harvard University's Kennedy School on the 5th day of a state visit to mark the 70th anniversary of US-South Korean alliance, Yoon said that the Russian invasion was a violation of international law and the rights of Ukrainians. Answering another question, Yoon rejected the notion that the Washington Declaration he agreed with Biden meant that they were accepting North Korea as a nuclear-armed state, adding that he was against treating North Korea's possession of the weapons as a disarmament issue. Yoon said that the Washington Declaration required Seoul to keep respecting the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and not acquire its own nuclear weapons. Moving on, French Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna expressed support for Georgia's aspirations for EU membership during her visit to Tbilisi on Friday. During the news conference with her Georgian counterpart, Colonna said that Georgia's future is within the European Union and that they want this future to become reality. French Foreign Minister noted that the country needs to continue improving legislation and complete reforms that will ensure the freedom and protection of public institutions. According to her, Georgia needs to comply with European values in order to obtain the status of a candidate. Colonna also called Georgia to continue its efforts to establish peace in the Nagorno-Karabakh region, a mountainous enclave that is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, but populated by about 120,000 ethnic Armenians. Colonna has visited Azerbaijan and Armenia in the past 2 days, urging both sides to undertake confidence-building moves and resume talks on a settlement. Now, taking a veiled swipe at former U.S. President Donald Trump, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that he was worried about the future of American democracy. He said this during a visit to New York on Friday. At the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, Trudeau said, "The United States is the greatest democracy of the world, and today it's being actually devalued by so many citizens." He did not refer to Trump by name, but had harsh criticism for policies and practices closely identified with the former president, from isolationism to stoking voter anger. He added that similar forces were running rampant in Canada and other democracies, with people feeling that the system was rigged and politicians were tapping into that anger and anxiety aimed at government and democratic institutions. Trudeau also praised President Biden for his working to address economic and other factors behind the political unrest that marked his predecessor's tenure.
You guys are, the greatest democracy in the world. And right now, it's not just that it's being taken for granted by so many of your citizens. It's actually being devalued to a certain extent. It's not people's fault. I mean, the same forces are happening in Canada and elsewhere. It's that too many people feel the system is rigged against them. And in politics, and the political choice that is running rampant around all of our democracies, and our citizens have always been able to roll up their sleeves, work hard, and build a better future.
Pope Francis started a trip to Hungary on Friday. He pointedly warned of the dangers of rising nationalism in Europe. Pope said to the Budapest government that accepting migrants along with the rest of the continent would be a true sign of Christianity. In a hard-hitting speech to government leaders, including Prime Minister Viktor Orban, Francis urged a rejection of self-referential forms of populism and strictly nationalist interests. Francis called for a return to the European soul envisioned by those who laid the groundwork for modern Europe after the Second World War, saying nations had to look beyond national boundaries. Francis made another appeal for an end to the Ukraine war, calling for creative efforts for peace.